right. Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, November 19th. It is 11:21, and we're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Governing Board to order. The first item on the agenda is roll call to determine quorum. Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Alding, Mr. Aguilar, Mr. Bass.
Here.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Here.
Ms. Faustinos,
Here.
Ms. Gustafson,
Here.
Ms. Hayes, Ms. Hill, Mr. Henigman,
Here.
Mr. Keykeper, Ms. Lane,
Here.
Ms. Loomer, Mr. Rice, Mr. Settlemeyer,
Here.
Ms. Williamson.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Just a reminder, it looks like we only have one remote committee member, but a reminder that we cannot use the chat box to make any comments or have sidebar conversations. Next on our agenda, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone could please stand and join me. All right, thank you. Next on our agenda, we have our public comment period. This is agenda item 3. This is any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on an agenda item, including items on the consent calendar, may do so at this time. Comments on other matters can be redirected to the public comment period at the end of this meeting. If any member of the public wishes to address the governing board, please, if you're online, raise your hand in the Zoom screen or dial *9. I'll start with in-room comments. I did just want to make one quick note that for the Tahoe Living, Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin item later today, when that item comes up today, it's for the board to ask questions and understand the policies that are proposed to be analyzed in the EIS. And just a reminder that in January, the board will meet again to take action on what will be analyzed in the EIS. So a reminder to the public that that item today is not the action item. That's for board questions and learning, and this will come back again in January. So with that, I will start with in-room comments, and we are limiting public comment to 3 minutes per speaker. As a reminder, is there anyone in person wishing to make a comment at this time? Come on up, Gavin.
Good morning, Gavin Feiger, Keep Tahoe Blue. So on the cultivating community, the housing phase 3 amendments, nothing really new from last month because nothing has changed yet, but a reminder for your discussion today. And we'll have more detailed comments in January when it comes to what's actually being considered for the EIS. They get more technical, but for just the broad discussion today, a reminder: our big issues, concerns continue to be coverage and commodities development, right? Like through these last 4 years in the first 2 phases, we really have tried, and I think successfully, been supportive of a lot of these changes. And the line we're trying to walk is allowing more dense, affordable, the type of housing that we need in Tahoe that we're really missing while still protecting the environment. So for coverage, it really, let's maybe start with the development rights or commodities. Like the growth cap can't be exceeded. So with the EIS, just making sure to take very careful care into looking at conversions, and the potential results of that, what could be bonus units, what couldn't be, not fractionalizing development rights, but potentially requiring more for larger units, that could be okay. But just making sure that we're not adding more growth development. 2030 sounds far away, but it'll be here before we know it. And that's the time for the real discussions on the growth caps. And then for coverage, just to get down to it, where we get stuck in these discussions, and I think with the Tahoe Living Working Group and with those of you I've talked with, is what do we do to make sure that stormwater is treated? And larger developments, they can pay for it. Market rate housing, luxury, short-term rental, condos, they can pay to treat their stormwater. They can pay to help jurisdictions build area-wide stormwater systems. What can't afford is affordable housing. So how do we find a solution where they can get more coverage, they can treat their stormwater on site, they can tie into area-wide stormwater systems, whatever it is? How can we get deed-restricted housing to be able to treat stormwater, and it's maintained and it's monitored and it's enforced without being an undue burden? And that's a really tough question. So phase 2, we settled on requiring area-wide stormwater systems, which is effective, but also makes those incentives really hard to take advantage of. So I feel like that's where we're really stuck as an organization. And I think hopefully the board can find some insight on that piece right there. And I think that the rest of it is difficult also, but for our issues specifically, that coverage piece and that making sure the stormwater is treated and in a non-burdensome way is a really difficult challenge. So thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Anyone else in person wishing to make comment at this time? All right, seeing no one else approaching, can I please turn to online for hands raised to make public comment at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 5 hands raised online. First hand up, 6 hands raised online. First hand up was Reverend Jorge Herrera. Please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, my name is Father Jorge Herrera, and I am the pastor here at St. Francis of Assisi in Incline, and this is where I live also. And before anything else, I want to thank Kaylee Arboleda and Chris Lepe that were here to do the workshop in Spanish here at the community at St. Francis of Assisi, where we had about 20 people present, 20 Latinos. And as I said before, that presentation was in Spanish. And I just want to make sure that you, the board, read pages 166 and 168 about this packet to truly understand how the workers that support the Lake Tahoe economy are being forced to live in crowded and unsafe conditions and move out of the area. We have teachers, we have employees that they had to move out of the area, either Reno or Carson City, because the rent was so high, or because they were asked to leave their place. And they renovated those places, and now they are renting those places for a higher price. And I, as a priest, I go and visit families here in apartments, and I see the conditions, how they live. And some of them are afraid to ask for improvements in their apartments because they are afraid that their rent is going to be raised again. And I think you, as a board, you have the power to do something about this. And we are concerned about losing our workforce just because of the rent or the lack of housing for people that work here and live here, and people that have been living in this area for years, and that sometimes they have to leave because of the rent being so high or the lack of housing, decent housing, because there can be housing, but it's not decent as it should be sometimes. And also our teaching in the Catholic tradition is that whatever you did for one of these least brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me. And so based on that, I challenge all of you and invite all of you to think about what you can do as a board to help with this situation. Lake Tahoe shouldn't be just for some few people. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, before we continue, I clicked around a little bit too quickly and lowered hands. So if you had your hand up, I know there were 2 other hands up. Please raise it again so I don't miss you. Thank you. Next hand up is Ellie Waller. Ellie, please unmute to make your comment. Oops, Ellie, you muted yourself. Please unmute to make your comment.
Oh, got it. Ellie Waller. The process for evaluating impacts for the Phase 2 and future Phase 3 affordable housing scheme is broken. The existing conditions environmental analysis is outdated. The regional plan update analyzed distinct districts separately for various reasons. The cookie cutter approach is nonsensical as north, south, east, and west shores differ immensely. And furthermore, within the local jurisdiction boundaries like Placer, Tahoe City Town Center is not the same as Kings Beach Town Center or their West Shore. The Douglas County Town Center is not like the high-density tourist districts or other area plans on the California side of the state line. Does anyone really understand what is being proposed in the phase 3 packet? Does anyone really understand what was approved in the phase 2 packet? We do know 65 feet and 100% coverage is allowed and inadequate parking standards are included. Will phase 3 amendments provide significant relief for the at-need Tahoe family since there is no income cap? Not that I can ascertain. What happens to cars with no parking spot allotment and the residents and businesses that are already struggling with parking issues? How many units can each local jurisdiction build needs to be determined, as unused development rights could yield up to 3,360 multifamily units. Also, that there are mandates that already exist in California for low and very low income residents that are not being met. Will these changes cause exacerbated fire evacuation issues that have been identified in the Squaw Valley and Palisades legal challenges? Have you considered that the fixed infrastructure is already at capacity, especially in town centers, which is not being addressed? Phase 2 approved amendments and phase 3 proposed amendments may pencil out for developers, but they write off the current residents' issues and concerns and those most in need in the lower income brackets. Why do we, the people, continue to participate? Just to be told by our local jurisdictions, we took your recommendations into consideration, but we're choosing to adopt TRPA maximums? It's because we embrace what the people that live in these unique communities want and should have a say-so in their future community character and makeup. Lastly, we are actual communities where are actual community members' aspirations for future planning presented in these outcomes and approvals of these processes and workshops? I also want to state, I agree with a comment by Nick Spiel in the last committee meeting that do give us an opportunity at the beginning or at the actual agenda item. It's more comprehensive when it's done then. Thank you.
The next hand raised is Melissa Soderston. Melissa, please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, Melissa Soderston, South Lake Tahoe. I would like to first state that it is imperative that the community have an opportunity to comment on items after presentations and before discussion for the sake of transparency and, fair engagement. We also would appreciate being able to see your faces on these screens when we're making our comments so that we can know that you're listening to us. That's a really big problem, is that when we're making our comments at the beginning of the meetings or at the end of the meetings, it's often tuning out time. People are knowing it's public comment time. They're not listening in. And I really would like to see your faces when I'm forced to be here on Zoom to know that you're listening to me. Very important. Thank you. Also, on the housing stuff, it is commendable that we have spent so much time discussing housing, but what we are not doing is providing actual affordable housing. Achievable does not mean affordable, and many of our lowest income community members are never going to even be able to meet that affordable threshold. They just are not, they don't have the capacity. We really need to start thinking outside of the box. Your funding should be focused primarily on providing the infrastructure needs that we need to support these projects. So you're talking about how people are struggling to implement their, water mitigation and stuff like that. Then that is your job to take the funds that you have from our federal tax dollars and implement those infrastructure problems or needs. We need these projects to be implemented from your level. You spend a lot of time doing these pat yourself on the back, feel good projects, a lot of time on, these planning things, but we're not seeing actionable results in our community. We're seeing our forests be destroyed, and somehow you're telling us that makes our communities safer, but we're not getting, the proper infrastructure needs to prevent a wildfire from wiping out our town. We don't have proper evacuation routes. We don't have evacuation centers. We need warming rooms for people that are unhoused. My children should be able to park a small RV on my property without being required to have sewer hookups, because that is a simple and actionable step that we can take to provide people with housing now rather than 10 years from now. So big developments are, seem to be your forte. Absolutely don't think that it is the mission of your agency to do anything but protect our environment. So if you focus these funds on our infrastructure needs and stop making it so difficult for people to implement projects here by removing some of the zoning issues that we have, which doesn't mean more development, it means lesser fees and actually supporting good projects rather than just hoping for the biggest project that will bring you the biggest amount of money. Thank you.
The next hand raised is Niobe Burden. Niobe, please unmute to make your comment.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Niobe Burden from Tahoe Vista. I'm a Lake Tahoe advocate, conservation photographer, and on the executive committee for the Tahoe Area Group Sierra Club. I want to express my deep concerns about the Phase 3 housing amendments here in the beginning of the process. I also want to state clearly that I agree with and support the comments submitted by the North Tahoe Preservation Alliance and the League to Save Lake Tahoe. Their analysis highlights serious issues that must be addressed before Phase 3 moves forward. The public has been told Phase 3 is a modest update, but the actual content represents the largest expansion of development potential since the 2012 regional plan. The scale of change demands updated analysis, which is not yet in place. First, converted unused development rights, CFA, TIUs, payouts, into up to 3,316 new multi-family units with significantly increased population, traffic, water demand, and evacuation load. Yet, there has been no cumulative basin-wide environmental review or capacity studies done. Second, the introduction of scale development rights fundamentally alters the meaning of the regional growth cap, allowing fractional development rights means the actual number of units per parcel can increase dramatically. As the League emphasized, any modernization must maintain the integrity of the development rights system, stay within the growth cap, and ensure deed-restricted housing, not market rate units, benefit from incentives. Third, Phase 3 extends height, density, and coverage incentives outside town centers into neighborhoods never analyzed for the level of intensity. These areas already face severe congestion and two-lane roads at level of service F and no updated basin-wide evacuation modeling. Public safety must come before upzoning. Phase 3 reduces project level review for multi-unit developments, including fourplexes. Scaling up development while scaling back oversight is not responsible planning. Fifth, fee reductions and coverage incentives are proposed without consistently requiring deed restrictions. I strongly agree with the League that all incentives, fees, coverage, bonus units, and development rights must be reserved exclusively for deed-restricted, affordable, and moderate workforce housing. Incentivizing market rate or second home development will worsen the crisis and undermine community housing goals. 6, SDRs must be...
I'm sorry, you're at 3 minutes if you want to submit the rest of your comments in writing. Thank you. Our next commenter.
The next hand raised is Rob Olson. Rob, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello, I'm Rob Olson. Sorry I cannot be there in person, but I'm on a family trip. I'm calling to express my support for the proposed policy package cultivating community, conserving the basin you will be getting into today. As a member of the Tahoe Living Working Group Phase 3 and the representative for the contractors, I believe this package has the potential to significantly increase the number of workforce housing units in our community while improving the environment as well. While I support the entire package, I would like to specifically endorse the following proposals and hope you agree. Scaling development rights. I believe this approach will allow planned density to reach capacity more efficiently and thoughtfully without increasing overall plan density. Accessory dwelling units, ADUs. I agree that ADUs as accessories should not require residential units of use, development rights, consistent with other accessories in the TRPA code. Additionally, I support decreasing coverage requirements for ADUs. Lower and deferred fees, lowering fees and otherwise deferring them until inspection. A final inspection would provide a critical financial runway for projects. I also suggest the board immediately defers fees on all workforce housing projects as soon as possible while this policy update is taking place. This would encourage projects such as ourselves trying to do something this summer to break ground, knowing that possibly the fees could be waived at a later date. Gavin's spot on. Don't add extra cost burdens when trying to use workforce housing incentives for phase 2, such as the required stormwater treatment. Allow folks to simply manage and maintain on-site or at the curb so long as they do proper maintenance over the years of their systems. Rethinking land coverage, providing the public with more options to protect the environment while allowing for highest and best use of the land is an excellent incentive. Adjusting development standards and in town center boundaries, while not suggesting all areas become town centers, expanding these boundaries just a little bit could create more opportunities for workforce housing. Securing subsidy funding. I advocate for securing subsidy funding for workforce housing, potentially through transfer tax or new fees on short-term rentals that could currently apply, much like other commercial fees are for other projects. This gives equitability amongst all projects. Thank you for your efforts in reviewing and moving these important initiatives forward at your next vote. Thank you.
Next hand raised is Helen Neff. Helen, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you. Helen Neff, Incline Village resident. I'm also talking on cultivating community, conserving the basin policy. I submitted written comments, which I hope that everyone had a chance to read. It has been said, it needs to be repeated. The priority needs to be public safety and a realistic evacuation plan. But after that, please make sure that this next phase of housing policy actually produces housing that our local workforce can afford, not just more market rate units dressed up as achievable. As written, this package will tilt heavily toward market price development. There is a limited supply of development rights, and without strong protections, they will always flow to the projects with the highest financial return. Achievable is defined so loosely, it can easily serve higher income households, not teachers, not service workers, not the people who keep this region running. Incentives reduce costs, but they do not guarantee affordability. And bonus units are not even reserved strictly for workforce housing. If this process is going to matter, the policy must be strengthened. Clear income and occupancy limits, a required share of deed restricted workforce units in any project using bonus units, a protected reserve of development rights that cannot be diverted to market rate projects, and enforced permanent deed restrictions. Deeper subsidies are probably needed, and that should be realized sooner rather than later. The community supports housing for local workers, but that will not happen unless you draw a firm line ensuring these policies deliver real workforce units and not the illusion of them. After years of process, studies, and public engagement, please make sure this policy actually serves the workforce, the people who work so hard to be sure our communities function. Thank you.
There are 5 more hands raised to comment. Next hand up is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. TRPA keeps repeating the same pattern. Promises no growth, shifts definitions or units behind the scenes, quietly enables thousands more units, more density, more height, more traffic, and more pressure on a fragile, overstressed basin. Every time TRPA pushes another overreach, our coalition comes back with sharper evidence, stronger public comments, and more people paying attention. There will be a time when the public and the counties can no longer ignore the contradictions. You can't claim no net growth while enabling 3,316 new units. You can't claim environmental thresholds while removing review. You can't claim equity while producing market rate housing with no income cap. You can't claim public process while making decisions in working groups that don't reflect basin residents. And it would really be great when people talk, if they say what they're representing. Like, I'm a developer, I'm not, but one of the callers was, and just to say that you are, or say you are, work for planning for development. That would be really helpful and transparent. And the public is constantly told not to worry because TRPA has a cap on development, but caps only work if definitions stay stable. Phase 3 changes the definitions, and the result is more and more and more. I urge you to slow this process down. The basin deserves updated evacuation modeling, updated environmental review, and full transparency before approving a package of this magnitude. Tahoe's future should not be reshaped through technical policy shifts that the public does not understand and that have never been properly analyzed. So you're going to do it finally now, but you've already passed phase 1 and 2 with no analysis, classic case of piecemeal planning. So, none of this stuff is working. Do you ever think that maybe it's not the solution? This policy is failed. It's been since 2012. John Hester and Joanne Marquetta brought it forward, and they just keep doubling down. Cost of construction now are so much more expensive than when the consultant was hired to say we needed to do all this high density development that, it's really questionable whether anything will work. Thank you.
Next hand raised is Nick Spiel. Nick, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello, I'm Nick Spiel, a Tahoe resident, not a developer. I just wanted to thank the TRPA for its efforts to lower the barriers to housing development, lowering the cost of housing and living in our community, especially in an expanded town center area close to transit. In particular, I think it's important to address the loophole regarding tourist accommodation units, which treats full-time vacation home rentals as if they are housing, using up limited residential development capacity for tourist accommodation. Please enforce your established limits on the total tourist accommodation in the basin for VHRs and hotels combined. Thank you also for all the outreach to include public input in this process. I encourage you to move forward with gusto. Thanks.
The next hand raised is Aaron Casey. Aaron, please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, hi. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Erin Casey, CEO with the Tahoe Housing Hub. And on behalf of the Hub, I do want to express our support for the TRPA's Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin Policy Study. As an alternate on that committee, I have really appreciated the very robust discussion, the diversity of opinions, thoughtfulness that went into putting this package together. And I think it really represents exactly what our region needs right now. A thoughtful, data-driven look at how we can expand housing opportunities for local workers and residents across all income levels. I note there's this emphasis in some comments on achievable, but we've had very robust discussions in these committee meetings about all income levels and how we might look at incentives differently in order to incentivize development, not just in the achievable ranges, but also in the affordable ranges too. I also want to say that we really appreciate just the opportunity to be a part of this process. We do think that this package, in terms of a study, could yield some very good recommendations on how to move forward. And it may be that we learn that some things we don't want to change. That's the benefit of doing a study right now, to really look at it and what makes the most sense. And so I have just really appreciated all of that. I've appreciated the number of community members present in these settings, the diversity of experience, and the diversity of perspective. And I think it's important for all of those who may not attend those meetings to know that what you see in front of you today represents a large, robust body of work from a lot of people who care very much about the community, who have different points of view, and are eager to understand what might work, what might not work as a result of this study moving forward. So thank you very much, and I'll yield the rest of my time.
3 more hands raised to comment. Next hand is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello, Alan Miller, Civil Environmental Engineer, South Lake Tahoe. We'll talk about the Phase 2 and Phase 3 housing amendments coming up and going forward. And I want to comment about the public participation allowed before the governing board. I want to support Ellie Waller and Nick Spiel with their comments concerning modifying your public hearing process to be more contextual and provide opportunity for public comment during items rather than just at the end or at the beginning. Most people don't know that TRPA changed its public meeting processes to be illegal with regards to the open meeting laws in 2019 as a deliberate attempt to thwart public participation when the public became irate over the telecom policies being implemented by TRPA. And so that persisted until 2025 when the processes were changed to minimally comply with the open meeting laws and with requiring comments up front only. To me, that just shows you're not really interested in any contextual issues or getting any feedback on the board directives that may be applied other than just commenting on staff reports. And it's confusing to the public. I believe that they have confusion of, if they're like me, as to when a public meeting is a public hearing or whether there will be an opportunity for public hearing, and if so, when, or whether they only have to go by the written information and so forth. So it really limits public interest and transparency. It plays in with the illegal regulations that you follow, typically allowing only 7 days to comment on projects with significant potentially significant environmental effects. And we've got a lot of issues to deal with that are not being dealt with. The fire issues and evacuation related issues, population increases and shifting targets for that others have spoken of and so forth. So I really think that the governing board needs to move to having opportunities to comment during each item, even if it's limited in some way, and not just at the beginning and the end. Thank you.
2 more hands raised. Next hand up is Elizabeth Ballman. Elizabeth, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I am with a member of the Cultivating Community Working Group and a program director at Sierra Community House at North Lake Tahoe Social Services Agency with a focus on workforce rental assistance and renters' rights. I'd really like to echo the acknowledgement for Chris and Kaylee and Karen in bringing the community to the table around affordable housing issues, and also echo the support for increasing affordable housing in the region. In particular, I'd like to highlight the issue of mobile home parks, which have provided long-term, stable, affordable housing for some of the most long-term workforce members. Some of these are, especially in Kings Beach, are walkable to jobs and have been a very valuable and important part of the affordable housing landscape. Yet there is no limit to the rent increases in those properties. They're not governed by the same laws as other kinds of affordable housing. And many of these are facing ongoing increases that will be forcing out some of those long-term workforce members and tenants out of those properties. So we'll be looking at more need for affordable housing. And I'd really like to encourage consideration for those, which are some of the most key and vulnerable members of our community. Thanks again.
And the last hand raised is Alexis Aller. Alexis, please unmute to make your comment.
Good morning, governing board members. Alexis Aller, Executive Director of Mountain Area Preservation. I submitted a comment yesterday, a few minutes after the online submissions closed. So I went ahead and emailed that to you all, and appreciate you all wading through these complex draft policies to advance housing. I just want to reiterate that the goal of this process is to advance housing for our most vulnerable communities as well as our workforce. It is inappropriate to extend these policies, the phase 2 policies, to market rate and deed-restricted housing. I think that theme has been consistent amongst workshop members, and I really want to reiterate that to the governing board today, that the funding that TRPA was afforded to advance this planning process was directed to our vulnerable communities. So let's stay focused on that and remember that these policies and program considerations are for the workforce, senior citizens, disabled, and our low-income communities. That said, we did submit comments. We've been participating throughout. I understand today that you all will be visiting each of these policies through a thoughtful workshop. I think thinking about each of them and how it pertains to the future environmental impact statement is really critical in thinking about these policies. And the key is maintaining the growth cap. That's been reiterated throughout the process, and I really hope that can be honored today in the discussions and in the policy packages that move forward for the environmental impact statement. So thank you again all for your time today, and of course, the heavy dive into these policy packages.
And Madam Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment.
Thank you. That we will close then public comment for our beginning period. Let's do approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, Director Reagan?
No, Madam Chair, just to point out, following the conclusion of the full board meeting, there's a regional planning committee meeting starting no sooner than 2:30.
Thank you. We will deem the agenda approved as posted. We're going to do approval of minutes, and then before we get to the consent calendar, we do have to take a break from the governing board. Nevadans, we have to convene as NTRPA for a business meeting. I'm really sorry, you guys. I do this to you every month, and I say I'm not going to, but we're going to do a working lunch. We're going to get our lunches quick and eat quick. Let's do a quick approval of minutes. That's agenda item 5. You have a draft set of minutes from October 22nd on page 31 of your packet. Does any board member wish to make a change? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve minutes.
Madam Chair, I have just a few clerical changes that I've requested, and I've shared those with Maria. And with that, if there are no other members of the board, Ashley, do you have some changes to recommend?
I also shared some minor copy edits with Maria.
Okay,
thank
great.
you.
So based on that, based on the incorporation of those changes, I move to approve the minutes from the October 22nd, 2025 governing board meeting.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, so why don't we go ahead? It's noon. We are going to break until 12:15.
12:15-ish.
12:15-ish. Nevadans, if I could get you all where's
Washoe Fremont, right across the hall.
Grab food first though, Nevadans. Come to Washoe Fremont. We'll have our business meeting and come back to the full board as quickly as we can. Thank you all. We're adjourned for right now until 12:15-ish. It is 12:15 and we're going to start back up. We are now onto the TRPA consent calendar, which is agenda item 6. There are 3 items on consent. The first item on consent was reviewed by the Operations and Governance Committee, the second by the Legal Committee, and the last by the Transportation Committee. Brooke, can we please have an update from Operations and Governance?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Operations and Governance Committee thoroughly vetted the October financial report. There are no alarming or concerning matters to report, and the committee recommends the board accept the October 2025 financial statements.
Thank you. Next up, we have the legal committee, the Smelser settlement. We did meet in legal this morning, and the legal committee unanimously recommended to the board that we approve the settlement agreement as outlined in attachment A, the highlights of which include a $48,000 payment set forth in the payment dates that are outlined in the settlement agreement, as well as some corrective actions for TRPA code, removing the illegally established land coverage within 1 year of governing board approval of the agreement, and other conditions that were set forth in the settlement agreement. And Graham, anything else you wanted to highlight on that one?
I don't think so. Not this time.
Thank you. Were there any questions on consent calendar agenda items 1 or 2? Please. Why not actually, if we could, thank you for asking, Ashley. Let's get through all the consent items, and then if it's okay, we'll go back through. Alexis, can we please have a quick update from transportation?
Yes, we went over the grant program recommendations. This wasn't an action item, but we were in support and want to see some more movement on some improvements on Highway 28 in Incline Village for the Washoe Tahoe Transportation Plan. We also approved the 26 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. And we gave direction on the transportation project impact assessment process and amendments to Chapter 7 of the regional plan goals and policies. Had a really robust conversation on that and look forward to that coming back to the committee and the board.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ashley, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
I just had a comment on consent item number 2. And I already talked about this with Graham just to get a sentence, sorry, Ashley Conrad Sater for the record, just to get a sense of how we charge settlement fees. Because I noticed that with the settlement we offered, we allowed the homeowner to take 4 years to pay TRPA back in a way that amounts to a no interest loan, because the total amount is being paid back over 4 years. And so I was just asking if there's anything that prevents us from offering a time horizon for paying a settlement back, but charging market interest rates to ensure that, you know, the cost of money when that final fee is paid actually matches inflation and, you know, the cost of the projects that we're doing on the ground. So there's no limitation to doing that. And I know that it's a big process to get to the settlement, and I don't want to, you know, I'm prepared to vote yes on this. I just am bringing this up to say that in the future, when we think about fees and allowing time to pay those fees back, that either the homeowner can, you know, take out a loan to pay them all at once, or can take out a loan from us to pay it over time. But that, you know, that no interest loan for something that was illegal just feels very wrong to me when so many of us have to take out loans to do legal things and permitted projects. So that's a very long comment, sorry, but just by way of saying we need to think about interest when we offer this money out.
Appreciate that comment, Ashley. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board on any of the consent calendar agenda items? And if not,
Madam Chair.
Oh, please.
Thank you. I also wanted to comment on number 2. First of all, I wanted to thank TRPA for being proactive on this. I don't personally feel that the penalty fits the crime, but it is what we have in our disposal. And you know, this was damage that was done to state property, being the California Tahoe Conservancy. So I'm happy that TRPA at least did something. And I'm hoping that down the road, perhaps we could partner better with organizations like the Conservancy and have stiffer penalties. And I also agree with you. It feels like a low interest free loan. You know, he probably paid the contractors already to tear down these trees, and it was probably as much as we're finding. So disappointed, but also appreciative of the effort that TRPA went to get this done. So thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. Other questions or comments on consent? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent calendar. Thank you. Can we please call the roll?
Ms. Aldine?
Yes.
Mr. Bass? Mr. Aguilar? Ms. Conrad Seda?
Yes.
Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos?
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper? Ms. Gustafson?
Yes.
Mr. Rice? Mr. Henigman?
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Lane?
Yes.
Ms. Loomer? Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 7, which is administrative matters. This is a great one. This is agenda item 7A, a resolution in honor of TRPA staff member Lori. And Lori, I'm going to say your last name with my native Wisconsin accent, which is Hockenberry, and you're going to correct me how badly I got that. Information on this item can be found on page 115. And Julie, if you could please introduce this and read us this awesome resolution.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure. I'm Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I would like to invite Laurie Hockenberry and her supervisor, Ken Caseman, up to the podium because you should be sufficiently honored while you're in front of everyone for 35 years of service. So come on up. Thank you. Thanks, Ken. I have a resolution that I'm very pleased to read into the record. And 35 years is such an achievement. I've had the great pleasure of working with Laurie for 22 of those 35. We must have recruited her in junior high school, you know. Okay. I'm going to do the honors here. Laurie Hockenberry has served the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency for 35 years, beginning her service in September 1990. And whereas Laurie has held numerous roles and responsibilities during her tenure at TRPA, including receptionist, IPES and Land Capability Planning Technician, Executive Assistant for the Environmental Improvement Program, the Primavera Project Manager software, Records Coordinator, and always approaching each of these roles with dedication, skill, and innovation. Whereas Laurie was an original member of the TRPA Underground Lunchtime Workout Group, setting an example of wellness and camaraderie in the workplace. And we invite you to come to our spruced up gym when it's ready next spring, so you can come back and lead us in some workouts. Whereas Laurie single-handedly brought order to and managed a file room of over 46,000 files and knew how to find a file that had been put in the wrong place and possessed an uncanny ability to detect and bust certain employees trying to sneak files out of the file room without checking them out through the process. And whereas Laurie has led efforts to modernize and streamline TRPA's record systems, entering information for thousands of parcels into the TRPA parcel tracker on laketahoeinfo.org, and preparing thousands of records for scanning, improving efficiency, and making information easier for staff and the public to access. Whereas the institutional knowledge and commitment that Laurie brought to TRPA will be deeply missed by all who have had the privilege to work with her. And whereas Laurie now embarks upon a well-earned retirement, looking forward to spending more time with family and doing volunteer work. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the governing board of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency does hereby extend to Laurie Hockenberry our sincere and grateful appreciation for 35 years of dedicated service to Lake Tahoe and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and our congratulations on her retirement, passed and adopted by this board to come. So we have something for you, Laurie, this beautiful piece with the symmetry of the lake. I give that to you. Thank you. And say congratulations. And if you want to say anything, but you don't have to. Yeah.
A wild, crazy ride, and it's about all I can say. 35 years, you see a lot, and you go through a lot, and it's been quite an experience. So thank you.
On behalf of the board, thank you so much for your service. It's impressive.
Thank you, governing board members. I did want to just reiterate, we as a policy agency get really down in the details of big, important policy topics for our lake, for our communities. But it's the people of this agency that actually make it happen. And so Laurie is the second most tenured employee, and Linda Allen is still here with, I think, one more year with Laurie from Laurie Hockenberry. So thank you, Laurie, for your service. We're deeply grateful.
And this will be a tough one, guys. I'm looking for a motion to adopt that resolution.
So moved.
Thank you. Can we call the roll, please?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Bass, Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keykeper, Ms. Gustafson,
Aye.
Mr. Rice, Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Williamson.
Yes, and thank you so much again, Laurie.
Motion passes.
Thank you. You had us biting our nails there for a minute, Maria. All right, that brings us to agenda item 8A, which is our Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin Policy Packages workshop session. Information on this item can be found on page 117 of your packets. And I believe, Jacob, I'm turning it over to you when you're ready.
While Jacob's setting up, I will jump in, and I want to thank staff for coming in to recognize Laurie. Well deserved. Again, Julie Reagan here, TRPA Executive Director. We have a presentation that Jacob will make, and then we are eager to break you into your work groups and the breakout sessions to get into the meat of the discussions with you as the board members. I did want to acknowledge some of the public comments that we heard earlier in the day around this item. I think you could see the different points of view. And I think inherently the work that you do as our policymakers, that we do as staff, is working very hard to listen, to develop policies that reflect that kind of input. I think it's really important to note that the priest of St. Francis of Assisi and Incline recognized our staff for going into the Spanish-speaking community, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done. We committed to go out to communities, not expect them to come to us as part of this process. And really proud of our team for making that a priority because we are in a crisis with so many members of the working community that clean the rooms, that support the hotels and restaurants. And there are some really dangerous situations that people are in bad housing scenarios. So we're committed to it. I do want to also note, the question of the environmental review keeps coming up. The 2012 regional plan looked 20 years ahead in terms of growth and development. And I just want to be clear for the public that we've been working within that, and we have not even hit the development numbers that we forecasted to be where we would be here in 2025. And that's why we're doing a full environmental impact statement, which is the purpose of this discussion and the board's action in January to help us define the scope of that environmental review. So with that, I will pass it over to Jacob, who's going to do the presentation, and then we'll get you into the groups as soon as we can.
Thank you, Julie. For the record, Jacob Stock, a senior planner with Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. We've got a lot to cover today, so no time for any shaggy dog jokes. I'm just going to get right into it with the purpose of the regional plan. So the regional plan serves first and foremost to advance the Tahoe region's environmental thresholds. So that's to protect water quality, lake clarity, to preserve our natural environment now and into the future. So what does this have to do with housing? I and the rest of my team have been studying that question intensively over the last couple of years. We've directly engaged about 3,000 people in that process, including nearly 700 attending meetings and about 1,300 survey respondents to our surveys, all to develop a set of proposed policy changes that we believe will advance our environmental purpose and make housing more accessible to our workforce. I hope that after this presentation and after the workshop that follows it, you'll find that housing has quite a lot to do with the environment and with the purpose of TRPA. And you'll support a motion in January to study these policies further through an environmental impact statement. Next slide, please. Okay, but before we get started, I want to start with some history on our regional plan and how we got to where we are today. So we're going to hit rewind and go all the way back to the beginning. Can we go back to the beginning, please? Oh, that's not funny. Can we go forward a little bit, please, Tracy? Thank you. Perfect. 1987. Here we are. So starting in the 1960s, Tahoe saw an explosion of growth leading to a serious impacts to water quality and lake clarity. Something had to be done, and it took quite a while to agree on what that something would be. Ultimately, that was agreed on in 1987 through the 1987 Regional Plan, which set out the foundations of the growth management system that we use today based on development rights. So existing parcels at the time were used to set growth limits. So those are called potential residential units, or PRUs for short. The plan also created allocations. That's the system to make sure that our growth didn't happen all at once, that it was timed out over several decades. And so a PRU, a potential residential unit, and an allocation were and still are required to develop any new home, whether it's an apartment, a unit in an apartment building, or a single family home. The regional plan also set out development rights for commercial, tourist, and recreational uses as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in our small groups. And so our forefathers and foremothers also saw the need to set aside development rights for affordable housing. The system wouldn't reliably create affordable housing on its own. And so bonus units were created. These are units set aside, development rights set aside for workforce and affordable housing.
Here's another way to look at potential residential units of use and allocations. PRUs are the how much housing, allocations are the when and how quickly. PRUs are the gas to build more homes, and allocations are the brakes to slow down or speed things up.
Yet another way to look at it, simplification, a potential residential unit and an allocation when combined create what we call a residential unit of use. That's a residential development right, and you can build a residential unit in the Tahoe Basin. Next slide, please. Okay, continuing on our time travel journey, fast forward to 2012. So we needed to see more improvement in water quality at this time, and our studies showed that redevelopment of older properties would help us meet our water quality goals. So this included all kinds of redevelopment, including condos without deed restrictions on them. The idea was that older development was impacting water quality, and replacing it with stuff built to higher environmental standards would help us meet our water quality goals. And so this is when we introduced total maximum daily load, or TMDL, as a measure of meeting our water quality goals, which has proven to be an effective tool, and we still use that as a measure today. Next slide. So in a lot of ways, the 2012 plan really worked. We're now in 2018, as you can see on the slide. Water quality is stabilizing in 2018, was stabilizing, but we needed more redevelopment in the right places to keep up that progress, keep it going. We also started to see the need for more workforce housing becoming an issue in our communities. So the Development Rights Strategic Initiative tried to address these issues by allowing conversions between different development rights. So for example, if you have some commercial square footage that you're not using, you want to build an apartment building, you can convert that square footage into development rights to build apartment units. That previously hadn't been allowed. It also created a definition for achievable housing. This is a deed restriction designed for local workers across income levels. Next slide, please. Okay, 2020. Our communities are really feeling the crunch on workforce housing now. And we're not seeing the bonus units used that we had set aside in 1987. We're not seeing them used in the ways that we'd hoped for. So the 1987 plan included 1,400 bonus units. 600 more were added in 2012. So that's 2,000 bonus units. By 2020, only 530 bonus units had been used throughout the life of those plans. So that's barely a quarter of bonus units over 33 years. And, there's a lot of reasons for this. Part of the reason is, one of the reasons, and we'll talk more about this in our breakout groups, is the large subsidies required to build deed restricted housing. So TRPA doesn't directly subsidize housing, but adding deed restrictions on can add complexity and add costs. And that's one of the reasons we think that our bonus units weren't being used as we'd hoped. So from TRPA's perspective, though, there's a really important environmental necessity to doing something about this. Think of it this way: about half of our workforce already lives outside the basin. So that's a lot of vehicle trips over the hill in the morning to get to work, over the hill again in the evening to get back home. That's increasing particles, particle pollution from the roads, which we know is a really major contributor to lake pollution. It's also creating air pollution and traffic, and it's making our communities more vulnerable in disaster scenarios as well. Next slide, please. Which is how we got to the Tahoe Living strategic priority. So this is our effort to continue advancing our water quality goals, our environmental mandate, and to also make workforce and affordable housing more accessible to folks in our communities. We started with allowing ADUs and housing converted from motels. We then created incentives for deed restricted housing. And next slide. Oh, back one more. Thanks. And so that brings us to where we are right now today, cultivating community, conserving the basin. This is our latest stage in our effort to make gains toward environmental goals and ensure that as much of our remaining growth as possible goes towards housing our local workforce and local folks in the community. Next slide. Okay, so I've already said workforce housing a couple times. I think it's time for me to explain what I'm talking about. What do I mean by workforce housing? So workforce housing is a general term that we as staff use to talk about any housing that's designed to house local people. So this can be deed restricted housing, but it can also be non-deed restricted housing that's designed to be more affordable. And so the policy changes that we'll be talking about today apply to both deed restricted and non-deed restricted affordable by design housing, unless it's stated otherwise. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've had an extensive planning process to come out with these policy changes. I've counted 26 meetings with the public and stakeholders attended by nearly 700 people total. I think I already gave you that number, but it's been a pretty extensive process. And what did we hear from all that outreach? So from our advisory groups, the Tahoe Living Working Group, the Community Partner Group, we heard that solutions should err toward simplicity. We also heard that we should make it easier to create the types of housing we want to see. A lot of people mentioned believe that simple deed restrictions could be effective. So for example, just a deed restriction against condominium conversion or a deed restriction against use as a short-term rental could be effective. Folks, a lot of our local planners and developers felt that coverage is a big driver of cost in the Tahoe Basin. And many people felt that the growth limit was important. Sticking to the growth limits was important. Next slide. So from our public workshops, we heard that the public generally agreed with our advisory groups. Some extra bits that we heard from the public was, really this interest in affordable deed restricted housing. People in the public felt that we still needed to do something with our deed restrictions and really focus on that affordable income level. And so just making sure that incentives are still in place to advance affordable deed restricted housing. And, like we heard from Father Jorge earlier in the public comment period, there was a big focus on quality of housing, overcrowded, the need for larger affordable housing. A lot of the stuff that you'll hear about today is focused on smaller housing because that's, you know, where we know we can influence costs, but there is also a need for larger affordable housing that could potentially be met with with our existing housing stock. And so we can talk about that more in our breakout groups. Next slide. Okay, so after all of this engagement, analysis, more engagement, and more analysis, we have 3 buckets of proposed policy changes to discuss with you today. And these are proposed for analysis in the environmental impact statement. I really want to stress that that's where we are in the process right now. We're not talking about adopting anything right now or even this year. Instead, we want to study these in more depth and understand their impact so we can come back after that EIS is finished and be confident that the amendments that we're making to our regional plan, to our code of ordinance, are going to be effective and serve their purpose. Next slide. So before I get too far into our policy changes, a reminder of what TRPA can do and what we cannot do. So TRPA rules are a relatively small part of the housing cost picture, but they do matter. And so an example of how we can make projects less expensive through policy changes could be, you know, the way that our requirements for obtaining a development right interact with a project, how we charge mitigation fees and when those fees need to be paid, whether a project is approved at staff level or at a higher level like the governing board or hearings officer, the length and requirements for our review process, and development standards like height, density, coverage, parking requirements. These are all rules, policies that TRPA has in place that impact the cost of housing. So TRPA cannot influence the cost of materials and labor. We can't influence the ability for a project to secure a loan and you know, get a reasonable interest rate. We don't directly subsidize projects. I think that's really important to stress, and we don't tax property owners. And our role is really mainly focused on the supply side of housing, and specifically the supply of new buildings, because our rules primarily impact the regulation of new buildings. Okay, and with that, next slide, please. Okay, so with that, I'll get into the proposed policy changes. So I know you all read the proposed policy changes in attachment A, and we'll get into the individual policies in our breakout sessions. I'm just going to give a really light introduction to each of these buckets, I'm calling them, of policy changes. So the first one is reduce time and cost. So this bucket recognizes that how we distribute development rights, our permitting process, bonus units, these can all be adjusted in some way to better support housing and environmental gains. So some key changes that we're proposing here would be to expand the use of bonus units to some non-deed restricted housing, including multifamily rental housing, as long as it cannot be converted into condominiums, accessory dwelling units and duplexes, for example. And we also want to look at scaling development rights. So that means we could adjust how we require development rights to reflect environmental impact. So this could potentially benefit smaller housing and accelerate environmental gains, but we want to study that in the EIS to make sure and really understand that. Next slide. So water quality and housing go together. So historically, we've seen water quality and housing as these two separate and sometimes conflicting things. And this bucket seeks to kind of change that paradigm and imagine how housing and water quality can actually support one another. And I really believe that they can. For example, we want to study if providing flexibility for workforce housing to meet water quality standards, in some cases without coverage limits, could create a co-benefit for housing and water quality. So multifamily housing uses less coverage per unit than single family housing. We know that. So at build out, could this policy help advance our housing and water quality goals? Could this actually reduce coverage overall? This is the kind of stuff we want to consider and study in the EIS. Next slide. Okay, finally, we know we need a range of housing types to meet our workforce housing need. We've heard that across the board from the public and from our advisory groups. That's the theme of this third bucket of policy changes. The key proposal here, in my opinion, is to allow more missing middle. So that's duplexes through fourplexes in our single family neighborhoods. These types of housing are an affordable and really low impact way to increase our housing supply in neighborhoods. And this policy changes like this have proven really effective in other jurisdictions around the country. So we want to study in the EIS if it's appropriate in Tahoe as well. Next slide. Here's a rundown of the key policy changes that I just mentioned. And there's a lot more, as I mentioned, and as you know, from looking over the packet, and we'll get into more of the other changes in more detail in the workshop sessions. I also want to point you to the housing forecast memo, which I believe you should all have at your desk. It wasn't part of the packet, but it was a supplement to the packet. And this talks about how these proposed changes might be expected to generate more workforce housing, gives some rough forecasts for what we might reasonably expect from some of these proposed changes. So I encourage you to glance at that when you have time, either during or after the meeting. Next slide. So last month you had a primer on these proposed policy changes, and I'm really sorry I wasn't able to be there. But this month we're doing a proof check for any refinements. We'll do the same at APC next month. So we'll be doing the same workshop with APC and getting their feedback before we ask you to initiate the environmental impact statement in January. And I think it's really important to see this, to see what the list that you're looking at today is really a list of what we want to analyze in the EIS. Once we start the analysis, it can be dialed back, but it's really difficult to expand on that analysis after the fact. So we want to cast a wide net and include anything that we see is worth analyzing. So really try to keep that in mind through the workshop today. Next slide. All right, so now's the fun part, the workshop, or the instructions for the workshop. So we're going to split all of you into 3 breakout groups, and I have the breakout groups listed on here. I'll tell you where to go. You'll have 25 minutes for facilitated discussion on each of the 3 policy buckets that I introduced. We have some worksheets on your desk, the fun, colorful worksheets there. Those have some supplemental information that'll help you with the discussion. They also have space for you to take notes. So you're welcome and encouraged to take notes and hand those back to us at the end if you'd like. If you don't want to do that, we also have note takers who are going to be recording the discussion, and we'll do a report back at the end of the workshop. So to provide an unauthorized paraphrase of a quote from our esteemed vice chair and representative on the Tahoe Living Working Group, Vince, we've already collected the ideas from the board, from the public, the Tahoe Living Working Group, the community partner group, and other stakeholders. We've studied these ideas and crafted policy changes that we think are going to do something. We've done more outreach, we've refined, we've studied more. And so now's the time for a proof check, for questions, for final refinements before we start on this really important EIS. So with that, we can split up into the groups. So, okay. First group. Group A, it's Group A here, but we can call it Group 1 as well. In the Washoe room, starting out with me is going to be Vince, Ashley, Cisco, still here? No? Just stepped out, but okay. He's in the Washoe room with me, and James. Yeah, right there. So group B will be in the Marlette room with Karen, and that's Haley, Brooke, and Alexis. And then group C is going to be in Tahoe room right here with Alyssa. It's going to be a hybrid group. So that's Shelly, Belinda, Megan, Cody, and Cindy. So I'll give you guys, a few minutes to get over there, get situated. Yeah, it's Belinda's online. I don't know if is Megan online? Oh.
Belinda, can you see the whiteboard? Good. Okay.
No, I'm just seeing the PowerPoint slide, but not the whiteboard.
Okay, let's get started. So we have Cindy, Cody, Shelley, and then Belinda online. Are you? Okay. Alternate. Okay.
She's stepping in when I have to leave.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is the increasing housing choice station. And there are a lot of different policies under consideration that are kind of fall into this category. So we're just going to go through each of the policies, kind of like the main ones that we want you to be aware of today. Again, as Jacob mentioned, this is sort of our recommendation for the policies that we move into analyzing in the EIS. This does not mean that, these policies will eventually get adopted, but we do think that they warrant further analysis in the environmental. And so let's see. So we will be asking for your formal recommendations on these policies in January to move through or to move into the EIS and study those. But today we just want to kind of make sure that you guys have an understanding of what these policies are, answer any questions you might have about them, and then understand if there are any major concerns about moving these forward into the EIS. Again, not for adoption, but just in the environmental analysis. We have Michelle Brown over here. She's gonna be taking notes for us. We have one page of the flip chart for each policy. So if there's no question, are you guys clear on the goal?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'll go through just kind of a quick summary of each policy so you know what we're talking about. And then just again, kind of the goal is to make sure that you guys understand, and then we'll note any sort of major concerns or any questions that you want to make sure that we get answers to related to the policies in the EIS. Yeah. Okay. Okay, 15 minutes, 16 minutes. Okay, perfect. So the first policy that we are considering is making ADUs easier to build by updating coverage, fees, and some of our development right requirements. And so the big one with this one is we want to, we know that coverage and development rights are a barrier to building ADUs. We made some changes, or we basically loosened our regulations in California in 2021 to allow ADUs. And since then, we've only seen about 16 get built, which is, for 4 years, that's not very many. And so the policies that we would like to consider primarily for this, or for ADUs, to support ADUs in the EIS, would be to remove coverage limits and excess coverage mitigation fees for ADUs under 750 square feet. And so again, this would be sort of like removing some of those barriers for smaller units that we know typically go to, that typically go to or house our local workforce. They also house, family members, and just provide flexibility for homeowners that, that are interested in building them. So I'll open it up to you guys for any questions or comments.
Yes, and I know in Placer County we're, and I think throughout the basin, but no STRs are allowed. So we do like above garages or other units, they can have a kitchen, they can have a secondary unit, but not only one STR on a property. So if it is an STR and they're putting an ADU, it has to be long-term rental. If they're a full-time resident, we will allow them to do a short-term rental in the ADU.
So Cindy, can I ask, in Placer, when you say long-term rental, so they cannot be used by a family member who's not working in the basin unless they pay rent? How do you don't restrict how they're used?
No,
Yeah.
it's just that not allowing two short-term rental permits on a property.
Okay, because I don't know how that helps workforce housing if you've got a member of your family occupying.
It probably doesn't immediately, but it may
Yeah. Okay.
long-term, but it really gets hard to say you must rent it,
Oh, I know.
I mean, that's our intent. So I don't know, is there, yeah.
Yeah, I guess we haven't done an inventory of the ones that have been built, how they're being used and who's occupying them.
We don't have an inventory for Tahoe, but in the state of California, which I know is a little different, it's about 50% of them are used as long-term rentals for someone, not their family.
Not related. Okay.
And I will say that we do get questions from folks who want to build an ADU. And quite often they want to build it for, their child who is going to LTCC and possibly working within the community. So just because it is their family doesn't mean that it's not a member of our workforce.
Many years ago, we used to call them in-law units, right? And so as people aged out of their full-time home, they could stay on the property in a smaller unit and let their kids take it over. So
or granny flats.
Yeah, granny flat. Well, I didn't want to say that word, granny.
It's because granny's the only one that matters. So I'm assuming this category does not include the discussion about allowing these ADUs to be sold separately. That's under a different section of this discussion. Okay.
Yeah, so for right now, for the city, we have been providing development rights and coverage for free for multifamily properties and ADUs, even if it's not deed restricted to income levels, but we are requiring that these properties be deed restricted to not be a vacation home rental. And we're finding more people willing to do that than tie to an income level on a deed restriction. And I think it's something that we should really consider because we're trying to do this for local housing stock. If it's going to become a vacation rental, we know that's not going to be local housing stock. But the deed restriction to income as a property owner, I get it. It's something that's really restricts your property. So I think we should look at that, just making the deed restriction requirement to not be a short-term rental.
What's the enforcement mechanism coding in the city?
Well, what it would be is basically you have to have a permit to be a legal short-term rental because we want to collect TOT. And so if you didn't get that permit and then, the permitting process wouldn't allow it. And if you did do it, you'd be breaking the law. If you're ever, that's the problem. Enforcement is the problem. That's a fact. I mean, we honestly, our enforcement on the VHR situation is really done by complaint from neighbors more than anything. And we do respond to the complaints.
Yeah, Belinda, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm totally supportive of this, but I do recognize that there are lots of downsides. And even in my own neighborhood, which is a pretty, lower middle class neighborhood, we have tons of ADUs that are vacant. They get built with the intent of renting them out, and then they just sit there. So, and I know that there's no way for us to build in something that requires that they have to be occupied, but, it's just a concern that there's a mad rush to do it. And then I think sometimes homeowners realize, well, maybe I don't want somebody else living on my property, and they can afford to let it be vacant. It's just kind of sad. And I also was going to use the term granny flat. that is definitely where my head went. But I think now it's more adult children, that they have an affordability issue that they can't move out as young as, they used to in the past. And now I have, 30-year-olds that can't afford to move.
That's because nobody has basements anymore. So
yeah. I'm a fortunate one that did, but
Thanks, Belinda. Okay, so we'll definitely, and this is outside of just ADUs, but we're definitely looking at policies that incentivize, people to utilize their home, whether that's living in them full time or renting them out full time. Yeah. Yeah. So right now we waive quite a few fees, our application fees and our mobility mitigation fees for deed restricted ADUs. For non-deed restricted ADUs, we do know that particularly the mobility mitigation fee, and other mitigation fees like the excess coverage mitigation fee. If you are able to have more additional coverage, those can get expensive. So looking at ways that we can potentially like offset those fees.
And the deed restriction though does have to be tied to income level for the mitigation fees to be waived.
The deed restriction right now to waive the mobility mitigation fee, it's just any of our deed restriction levels.
Okay, so no VHR would work.
No VHR would work. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I do want to keep us moving. We have, let's see, 8 minutes left. So I think I'm hearing general support, no major concerns for moving this policy forward into the EIS, but we'll definitely make sure we look at policies to encourage full-time use. So the next policy option that we're considering is allowing missing middle housing types. So that would be like a duplex, triplex, fourplex, like sort of our smaller multifamily home types in neighborhoods that have historically been single family. I do want to note that in most cases would require also, a TRPA change as well as a local jurisdiction area plan change, because the zoning is duplicative there. So curious about your thoughts on that.
So in the city, it is probably our biggest missing gap. We've done a lot of work that is for the more low income and very affordable housing. And our biggest issue are the nurses and the people of the skilled workforce that are coming in our community and leaving. So exactly the exact way to get there, I'm not sure, but I would say for us, that's like a major priority to figure out.
Yeah, that's the focus of a couple of our programs, in our workforce housing preservation program, in which we help people buy homes. But we're subsidizing that with TOT funding grants, and we may need to adjust it up even higher because the cost of housing is going up quicker than our contribution to helping them. So it's definitely a critical piece. And it's critical not only, I always say it's an aspirational thing that many people are willing, like I was, to be a ski bum and do whatever you did to live here originally. But once you put down roots and have a family, you want to buy a home. And if you don't see hope for that, you'll leave the area and go somewhere where you can. And we see that over and over again in our 30-year-olds now that have all left the community and are buying homes in areas where they can purchase a home. So I think that missing middle is an aspirational thing that people miss, that giving people hope is really important to staying here.
I guess one of the things that I've always asked is, like in Truckee, for instance, there's a development that is all around the whole neighborhood is basically ownership housing that's for this. And how is Truckee able to develop that so much easier than we are? I know they're not under our jurisdiction, but yeah, exactly. Why are we not able to see those developments? What is it in our code that is stopping that? I was out in Aspen and they did an amazing development that was tied to the school district in the county. The same type of thing. Why are we not able to develop those type of projects?
But
if we're talking about Hopkins, I mean, that was a settlement.
It was a settlement on that particular one that the developer had to put in all the infrastructure. So that's what started. But even then, now that their fire insurance costs have gone up, they're saying it's not as affordable as it needs to be for the local workforce because they're experiencing the same insurance increases. But, requiring of developers is important in the basin. It makes it so much harder because we just don't have we don't have a lot of land. That's why we went to purchasing existing homes versus building new, because it's so hard to build new.
So is the intent here though to
Yes.
Could it be looked at from a development like that we would make the development so much easier if it was willing to deed restrict to affordable so that the overall development of a neighborhood, for instance, developer, the infrastructure cost and permits that we're requiring that are so much cheaper outside of the basin, is there a way to make those exempt for projects where the whole neighborhood would be turned into something like the Hawthorne Village? Where, yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm just kind of asking.
I don't know whether or not it fits into this category. I mean, achievable is kind of considered moderate income housing. So
Yeah, I believe that you'll actually talk about that with Karen. You'll talk
Karen.
about that when she cycles in here. Yeah.
Perfect.
Belinda, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear about this particular one. Is this only apply to new construction, this particular question, or does it also involve conversions?
It could involve conversions. Yeah, so like an existing single family home could be, if someone wanted to turn it into a duplex, right now they wouldn't be able to do so. But they could under this change.
Yeah, I really like that concept, and you know, in terms of also coverage issues, it helps us because presumably that single family home was built under our existing coverage constraints. So that to me makes a ton of sense, and also in terms of just being able to utilize existing structures so that you're not using more of our resources and having all the construction impacts. It just seems like somehow they should get bonus points for doing conversions to duplexes. So that would be awesome.
Yeah, and I would love to move us ahead unless anyone else has any critical thoughts on this one. Okay, so the next policy option, and we're unfortunately probably not going to be able to get through all of these with 6 minutes left, but let's see. So I'd like to talk about the option of allowing local jurisdictions to have more control over height and density. So right now in chapter 13 of our code, which is our area plan chapter, we sort of set the maximums for height and density. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping around. Michelle, can you go to, yeah, I think actually the next after that is one more. So we set the maximums for height and density right now. The city, with their area plan amendments that they have come through with in the last couple of years, have requested higher density for residential housing in town centers specifically. So right now we cap the density at 25 units per acre. They were requesting 65 units per acre, again, to sort of just allow increased density in our town centers that supports services and transit. There's quite a few arguments for it. But there is also, some arguments against it. It is for market rate, so it's not for deed restricted. We've also had requests for increased height over the years that exceeds, what we allow in chapter 13 right now. So this sort of all begs the question of whether we should even have a maximum, or whether we should, just be working with the local jurisdictions to make sure that whatever height or density they're proposing does not have an impact, basically. So curious about your thoughts on that.
So yeah, I mean, I think that the local jurisdictions should have more control, but I think we also do need to have, they need to meet certain parameters, right? I think that if we're going to allow for more height, density, less parking, the transit has to be delivered before we give the exemption to the policy. So like, we've got to make sure that the things that are mitigating what we're allowing are in place, working before kind of make sure we don't put cart before the horse.
I was just asking if you're just focusing on town centers or not.
That's a good question. I think just generally there's like high intensity, we have maximums that are specific to town centers. And then outside of town centers, it's just generally defers to the rest of our area plan. So yeah, I think I would assume that it's just for town centers.
Yeah, I think if it's not, I mean, you can kind of look at the cumulative effect of all of these policy changes. If you do have allowances outside of town centers in neighborhoods that don't have height and density, I could see that being a significant challenge with, existing communities. So, although I support it in town centers, I think we just need to be cautious of it outside, especially in existing communities. I would say yes in town centers, and limited usage of it outside of town centers. Correct, yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts on this one? Belinda, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think I just want to reinforce what Cody said. I think there definitely needs to be some discretion given to the local jurisdictions, but there needs to be some overall guardrails on that, if you will. So looking at what might be, some of the things that would, really be important. So, do we want to have, 10-story buildings outside of the casino area? I kind of doubt it. So, I think there are some important concepts that should be applied across the board. So that I would just throw that out as that would be one of my concerns.
I agree with Belinda. I mean, I I remember, the controversy that the high-rise casinos at State Line generated because of the height, because it was so uncharacteristic of the rest of the development around the basin. And I think it's important to take this in phases. In other words, let's see, by making these changes that apply strictly to town centers, let's see how effective it is. We can revisit these initiatives at some time in the future. We can reconsider some of the ideas that have been brought forth. If the ideas that we are presenting initially are not successful. So I agree. I think initially it should be restricted to town centers.
Thank you. Okay, we're at 129, so I am not going to bring us into another policy, but let's see. Karen should be rotating into this station next, so you guys can just hang tight and she'll come in and replace us.
What are the topics we didn't cover? I'm just kind of curious. How to unlock vacant homes, that's a tough one. I don't think we can even grapple with that one.
Yeah, unlocking vacant existing units, that is a hard one to crack. And it's very much like working with the local jurisdictions because they have programs like lease to locals that they can implement to do that.
Well, the other thing about having vacant homes that are vacant for maybe 9 months out of the year, it reduces VMT. Nobody's occupying those houses. People aren't going back and forth, from home to shopping. And so there are some environmental benefits to having these homes be vacant for a certain length of time.
Right. And then the last one that I wanted to touch on was expanding town centers and urban boundaries, just to sort of more broadly apply our town center incentive, our town center like redevelopment incentives to more parcels.
A previous item about restricting it, at least initially, to town centers.
Yeah.
Before we start expanding out into the adjacent areas.
Giving jurisdictions control of it, I think before we give them that control, they're meeting thresholds of affordable housing before it's kind of an incentive for them to meet those thresholds.
Karen, a reminder, you need to speak into the microphone so Belinda can hear you.
I see Belinda. Hello. Okay. Cool.
I know where's Linda.
All right, so this is the water quality and housing improvements go together. And we have Shay Navarro here. She's our water quality program manager to help with the discussion. And Jeff Cowan is our note taker. So I'm just going to give like a 3-minute overview of this, and then we'll open it up to questions. And as Jacob mentioned, one of the key reasons for us doing this workshop is for you guys to have a chance to ask questions about what was in attachment A. And then also we have, just get your feedback on what we've proposed so far. So for this one, what we're really trying to, get at here with this water quality topic, water quality is obviously like one of, if not the most important thing that TRPA is focused on, lake clarity. And, coverage and how we treat stormwater runoff from coverage is a key way of addressing that. And so one of the things that we're finding is that our coverage regulations, which really limit the amount of coverage, essentially at a high level, projects, are kind of allowed the same amount of coverage, whether they're for a single family home or whether it's for like a duplex or a fourplex in multifamily zones. And so that just encourages larger units. And so what we're hoping is that overall, if we can do more to encourage smaller multifamily units, potentially by allowing more coverage on each individual parcel where someone is trying to build a duplex or a fourplex or a larger apartment building, that will result in less coverage region-wide, because we'll be using more of our development rights for smaller units, like units that use less coverage per unit. Does that make sense?
Karen, how does that, if you look at it kind of globally, if you increase the amount of coverage on one parcel, that limits the amount of coverage available on another parcel. Could that be misconstrued as a taking of some sort?
It doesn't directly. I mean, I think that's one thing that we would probably want to look at in the EIS. Like if the environmental analysis says that, yes, we absolutely cannot increase region-wide coverage, I think we would analyze our proposal to say like, yeah, the incentives are in place that actually this is going to result in less coverage overall. But I don't think we would be specifically saying that if we allow more coverage on parcel X, then we have to allow less on another one.
Well, so if the maximum amount of coverage right now on a single family house parcel is 30%. Right? So I understand that we were transitioning from Bailey to IPES, and that's something that we're going to do in connection with housing development basin-wide, right? To provide,
I mean, it's one of
the options.
Menu options that are on this.
Yeah.
It's the NRCS one.
Yeah, NRCS. Yeah,
right.
that's
Right. Which I think is the Bailey maps are at such a large scale. I mean, everybody's kind of taken issue with how applicable they are today. And the IPES, system was specifically developed to ensure that people had at some point an opportunity to exercise their right to build a home.
Yeah.
So I frankly am in favor of that, transitioning away from Bailey.
Okay. Well, let's write down the concern about a takings, making sure that if we are allowing more coverage on some parcels, that we're not leading to a taking by like however we mitigate that.
And maybe I had a little explanation like I did at your Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday. So Shelley, the limitation on coverage is because of the slope, soil,
right,
geomorphology, all of that. We limited it basin-wide based on the Bailey's report.
Right.
But he also says in the front of that, urbanized areas may need different treatments. And so for example, the casinos have a stormwater collection system and they're covered way beyond the 30% maximum. So and what happened was with the 1987 freezing of land subdivisions in that compact, we froze a lot of development in place without stormwater systems. So what we're talking about is retrofitting like a new subdivision would do. I'm sure you've seen them in Carson City when you were on a supervisor there. They build in stormwater and flood control we didn't have that here. So one way you can basically not use the covered system is use a stormwater system and flood control
As an
system
alternative, right?
as an alternative. That then means that if I buy a parcel, I don't have to immediately write off 70% of it. I can instead maybe be part of a stormwater system and use the whole or a lot more of the parcel and build more housing.
Well, one thing
That's the idea.
Carson City has is a stormwater treatment assessment. I mean, on our water bill, we pay a certain amount of money, you know, for the diversion or the capturing of runoff and before it reaches the Carson River. And I don't know if there's anything comparable up here at Lake Tahoe.
There isn't yet, but Shay and I went to Douglas County's board meeting about a month ago, and they're considering a
Okay, well, maybe that's something that should be considered here as well,
Yeah.
an assessment district.
I will just to speak to that on the California side, there is some limitation because.
Oh, Shay, you need to talk into
Mike.
On the California side, there is some limitation for local governments to set up a stormwater utility.
Mhm.
I think it's Prop 218 that limited utilities without a vote of the people. You can do it for wastewater, water, and refuse, but not stormwater. But with TRPA's code, we have BMP requirements, and then we have area-wide treatment as a
Right.
different way to meet your BMP requirements. And so that is actually a workaround where you could collect an in lieu fee if a property is participating in an area-wide and paying a fee instead of installing infiltration BMPs on site. So that's one way. And by being able to collect that fee, that actually gives the local jurisdiction revenue to perform maintenance. Because it is one of the challenges to follow up with each individual property, thousands of properties around the
make sure
basin
they're
saying,
properly maintained.
hey, are you know, it's time to maintain your BMPs. You know, and we definitely have changed designs to facilitate maintenance.
I want to see before we get, now we have like 3 questions on the flip charts, and I just want to see if anybody has any questions on what you read so far before we get into those.
On this particular topic? you mean?
Yes, on with this particular topic.
I just want to say, I think it makes a ton of sense to allow this. I mean, if you think about using 50 bonus units, let's just say on 50 different properties with unlimited or limited coverage, but individually versus realizing those 50 units on one property, it makes a lot of sense to me that you would be more efficient, in building it and less impactful to the coverage if you were somewhat incentivizing more units on one property.
Okay. So could you go back to the, or sorry, doesn't Belinda or Cody, do you guys have questions?
Well, I also support this. I actually have property that's in the Bijou area erosion control, and I plan to join it to get my BMP certifications. One of the things, though, are we saying that if I join that, my coverage is going to expand if we were to pass this policy? Because I'm part of the area-wide treatment, and I've joined the assessment for each year. So would that all of a sudden open my coverage from 30 to 90?
What we're saying is, and so let's come back to that because that's the first thing I want to explain when we get to the first question. But let me just make sure, Belinda, do you have any questions? Okay, so yeah, if you could go to the first one, the menu of options. So the main thing that we're proposing is instead of having a focus on strict coverage limits, which we've had to date, is the focus would be on ensuring that each property is showing that they are fully treating their runoff to water quality standards. So the menu of options that we're talking about, there's basically 3. One, they could tie into an existing area-wide stormwater treatment like you mentioned, but what that would require would be the local jurisdiction would probably need to do quite a bit of work to show that there's capacity in that system. Like you might already be tied in depending how it works. Like, some stormwater treatment, like they get all the parcels at once, they get an agreement, you're automatically in. But if another way would be to say, hey, I'm in this area where there's this stormwater treatment system. I want to build up to 70% coverage. You need to have communication with the jurisdiction to ensure that their treatment system can handle that runoff. The second is to treat it on site So just like we do today, you would be treating it on site, and just showing through calculations that the systems that you're designing on site have enough capacity to treat the stormwater, and those need to be maintained is one of the key issues, as Shay was bringing up. That can be a challenge to parcel by parcel, make sure all those are being maintained. So we need to make sure we address that. And then the third one is similar. It's just having, so that one that I just listed would be to have kind of ultimate flexibility. You can build as much coverage as you can show you can treat on site. And then the third one would be still having some set coverage limits, like say like 50% coverage for multifamily. You still have to show that you can treat that coverage on site, but just having set limits might just reduce some complexity for like small builders. Like if you're building a duplex, you might not want to have to deal with like having an open-ended amount of coverage that you could have. So
you mean set limits, just
different limits, higher limits. Like right now, it's still 30% for most multifamily. Potentially you could go to 50% or 70%. And again, for the EIS, we are proposing that we're going to analyze that these policies would apply to all from ADU up to multifamily rental, not deed restricted. That doesn't mean that's the final policy that we'll ask the board to approve, but we do want to analyze. Those are generally workforce housing types, as long as they're rentals like a duplex or a triplex, any kind of multifamily apartment, as long as it is not for sale. The local jurisdictions have said those are primarily used as workforce housing. So we're trying to analyze having these incentives for those, even if they're not deed restricted, even though we've heard from many people that they don't support that. But just to be clear, that's what we're proposing to analyze in the EIS.
Can I weigh in? So I, and Karen, you and I have had this discussion before. Under the definition of achievable, there are three options, right? You have a household income not in excess of 120% of the respective county's area median income, or you have at least one household occupant who works at least 30 hours per week, or you're a retired person living in a deed restricted unit in the Tahoe Basin for more than 7 years. As an alternative to that, I'm not suggesting that that as proposed shouldn't be analyzed, but you know, my real concern is how many of these units, when they're not deed restricted, are going to be occupied by people working in the basin. I mean, if you're living in Carson City, you might think to yourself, this is great. I can move to Lake Tahoe, you know, I can move into a moderate income house and live my life, you know, and I you know, I appreciate that that sentiment, but I really think that that is not consistent with what we're trying to achieve. So what is, as an alternative to be analyzed, why don't we just combine the first two? So you have a household income not in excess of 120% of the respective county's area median income, and at least one household occupant works at least 30 hours a week. And then we'll leave option 3 alone. I mean, because I really am concerned about how many of these units are going to be fulfilling the need for, you know, affordable or achievable workforce housing.
Okay, so can you jot that down, Jeff, that Shelley is saying that we should consider analyzing actually so that would be more restrictive than the current achievable. It would be up to only allowing these new coverage policies to apply to housing that is both for incomes less than 120% of the area median income, and they have to show they're a local worker.
Right.
That's your proposal. Okay.
Right.
Do others have feedback on that or?
Yes, I think it's reasonable and accomplishes where we want to go. I'm curious with the erosion control projects that we have, and kind of we build them and they should cover so many parcels, right? Or there's so many parcels that could connect to them. Are we making sure when we're permitting those that the capacity is built into those systems for those parcels? And then if we're going to increase coverage when they're tied into them, we should be making sure that that coverage increase is also being built into the capacity of the runoff project, so that a parcel doesn't just, oh, sorry, we're to capacity and you're out of luck kind of thing.
Just to speak to that, I would say that projects that have been built previously probably haven't been set up to treat the capacity of what we're proposing today, but for properties to participate in an area-wide, that area-wide per our code, has to demonstrate greater or equal water quality benefit to parcel level BMPs. So for example, in the city, we have the mountain to marina area-wide treatment planning process that has looked at the watershed that starts at Cal Base and goes all the way down to Ski Run Marina. And as part of that, what we did is we looked at how much treatment would we get using our pollutant load reduction model, which is what is used by the TMDL, if everyone installed BMPs, everyone had parcel BMPs, and it produces, this is how much load reduction you would achieve. And then we look at on the ground conditions. If we determined what our build out would be if every single multifamily property took advantage and increased to 70% coverage outside of town centers and 100% coverage. So we had our maximum build out, how much maximum runoff would be generated, and then looked at what are the existing treatments, where are the gaps, and where would we need to put treatment in order to get to that same level of parcel treatment. And that's how we came up with our plan of this is what we need in order to provide that greater or equal water quality treatment. And so we have done that in Mountain Marina. There's definitely other projects around the basin that have shown we're treating the 20-year run-hour storm for this whole area, that's streets and parcels. We've done it. We're looking at doing it in the Tahoe Keys, a little bit of a different situation because it's high groundwater there, so you can't actually infiltrate. We're looking to get funding to assess 2 watersheds, Kings Beach and Dollar Point in Placer County, to start that process to say, what do we actually need on the ground to give us that greater or equal water quality benefit?
I would just add on that. I mean, I think one of our big concerns in this conversation is the infeasibility of building a system to be able to achieve what we hope to achieve out of this policy. Might be cost prohibitive without significant subsidies. So I think we have to look at the constraints on implementation of these policies. Now, that said, there are systems that are in place that have capacity or at capacity, probably for what they were designed for. But that's not to say that there couldn't potentially be a creative solution where we reduce the amount of water that they are treating through reduction of our streets or some other way that we're kind of reducing the current situation in exchange for treatment of housing and runoff of the housing properties. So I think we're starting to kind of think about other creative solutions, but I do worry about going down this path without a sense of realism of what we can achieve of building new systems without a significant funding source.
And I think that was one of Gavin's comments earlier was, is this really feasible? But we've been looking at, could we as the transportation planning agency look for complete streets money, as the water quality agency look for money for water quality projects, and then for housing, maybe find grants that would give us multi benefits, then we could maybe afford to go in and retrofit an area because we're going to get all 3 types of benefits. So it's going to take something like that to amplify what Stephanie said.
Yeah, so actually that I would like to get some direct feedback on that. So that is one of the things that we really hear is that the area-wide stormwater treatment is ideal, but it's expensive and hard to generate the funding. And so I guess I think grants are an option, but would we want to do we want to make our proposals for additional coverage be contingent on waiting to get those grants? Or how do you feel about the proposal of allowing more coverage for multifamily parcels as long as they can treat the runoff on site, so they would not have to wait for an area wide?
So on-site treatment, I mean, BMP is just doing your drip line infiltration trenches, to me is pretty minor in nature. But how about small detention basins? Do we have any of those? In Carson City, in a lot of jurisdictions, they also serve as recreational areas during the summertime. They're grassed. They provide, the ability to retain some of the water until it infiltrates. And I guess my question is, there is a reference to pervious coverage. I mean, how effective is pervious coverage? as a method of infiltrating runoff.
But, oh, go ahead.
I would say for pervious coverage, it reduces the amount of runoff being generated by that surface itself. I wouldn't necessarily think you would want to use it as your infiltration system for additional runoff. Like if maybe if you have a pervious driveway, water's infiltrating, that normally would run off of that driveway, but I wouldn't want to use that driveway to infiltrate off of the roof per se.
No, I'm not saying that it would be a substitute for the drip line infiltration trenches, but I think every little bit helps, and it might be kind of it's just another tool in the toolbox.
For sure.
But I think using little detention basins, you see them all over, you know, and they're multi-purposed. Obviously, you don't want kids in them, you know, when they have water, but you know, they're attractive. They're grassy places for the kids to play when they're not being used for water retention or water infiltration.
I see Belinda has her hand up.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that, you know, so many of these things are dependent upon getting the right set of funding for, you know, being able to implement. And I agree with the comments about, you know, really hard to, you know, gauge whether or not those pieces all come together at the same time. I mean, I think we've all experienced where that sometimes that'll delay a project for 5 years to have that happen. So I really think, you know, emphasizing looking at, you know, BMPs that can be implemented practically and, you know, will allow these projects to move forward should be the priority. Now, I think the EIS should evaluate, you know, the larger question. But I really do think that you know the constraint is going to be on, you know, how do we accelerate housing development in a way that you know is going to, you know, protect our environmental goals. So that's a real tough one, and I just, you know, think that it's imperative that we prioritize those projects where we know, for instance, that there is going to be an opportunity for doing transportation mitigation. You know, so that's a whole different, you know, that's a strategy situation as opposed to, you know, having, you know, some set procedural items that we want to follow.
Okay, thank you. So if I heard you, you said that you do think that we should be looking at, you know, basically BMPs or on-site infiltration, because it's hard to know if like grants will come together. But I don't think I completely understood the last thing that you said about transportation infrastructure.
That's what John.
Well, so if the opportunity for identifying, you know, sites that could be feasible for housing development, you know, can be correlated to where we're doing already transportation projects that include water quality, you know, elements to them, then, you know, that's more an analytical issue. Once you're there in terms of being able to identify sites that might be suitable, right, for housing development, is, you know, prioritize those where there's opportunity for you know, matching grants that could address some of the BMP issues.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely can support the on-site BMP infiltration, but I think we should also incentivize the homeowner or make it an agreement that when a stormwater facility is built around them, that they agree to the assessment that would be charged to join that, and that they would agree to join it. And knowing that that may be a long ways out, but if we're going to give them the benefits, I think it has to come with a caveat that makes them and requires them to be part of the later project, and that they agree to the assessment that would be applied. And I also think that we should have, and this would be to the experts to know, when does an inspection need to happen to make sure they've maintained their on-site? Is that a 3-year inspection? And that should also be an agreed upon fee that they pay. You know, I have to pay the backflow people every year for the utility district to come check my backflows at my commercial property. And this is part of keeping my water on. So I think we have to do the same for the on-site things.
Okay, thank you. And so great. And that's another question that we wanted to ask, is we're trying to reduce costs as much as possible for affordable, you know, deed restricted, affordable, and workforce housing. So I mean, it's hard because there has to be a nexus, like, but one of the proposals is to waive those fees for like affordable and deed restricted housing, assuming that we can show that the impacts are mitigated in some way, like potentially, through other projects. So I guess I'm just wondering, what is your appetite for charging actually the deed restricted and workforce housing projects that fee to make sure that that it comes directly from that, or would you prefer to find a way to waive it for those?
Well, the reason I'm not in favor of waiving it is because now we're allowing their land use developments and their rights to make more rental income and that type of thing much more, because we're giving this increased coverage. And like an inspection fee for making sure your BMPs are accurate every 3 years is very nominal. The assessment to join the Bijou erosion control, it's pretty expensive up front, but the annual fee isn't that much for the allowable coverage you're going to get for joining it, right? So I think that it's a trade-off that a developer looks at as a small cost to what they're going to make from the allowable coverage.
Okay.
The other thing you could do is, rather than charging it up front, you could just kind of amortize it over a certain period of time and to make it more affordable.
Okay.
I was thinking your comment about people agreeing to hook up later when the system's there, much like what we've done with septics as the sewer system gets extended. I'm sure you guys have probably done that with Lasser and Sparson as well.
Part of a development agreement.
Yeah.
Right.
So it takes a generation for it to happen, but you set the wheels in motion.
I think my sensitivity on the fees is, some are administrative fees and some are mitigation fees. And so what is the mechanism then to ensure that the mitigation is happening through another mechanism? Because they're nexus-based fees, I would just want to make sure that we are finding another way to mitigate effectively and not just waiving mitigations.
Yeah. Okay. I think that, yes, we're done. Okay, great. Thank you guys very
Thanks,
much.
Karen.
Oh yeah, sorry, Belinda. Okay, my mic's on now. So you all have already heard the spiel on this is not, we're not endorsing any policy changes right now. We're just for adoption, we're endorsing them for environmental study and analysis. We want to keep the tent fairly wide for that analysis, because we can't go in and add new stuff after the fact. We get to analyze what we analyze. We can always scale back if that analysis finds that something's going to have an impact that we don't want to see. So, to my notes. All right. Well, I've organized these into what I see as kind of like the big ticket stuff first. So we make sure we talk about the most important things first. And the first one that I think is the very most important and substantial policy change that we're proposing is this idea of expanding the types of housing that can use a bonus unit and making it as easy as possible in our administrative process to use a bonus unit. And so we're talking about expanding. Currently, bonus units can be used for deed restricted housing only. And we're proposing allowing them to be used for duplexes and fourplexes, accessory dwelling units, and multifamily rental projects, apartment buildings that are deed restricted only against condominiumization. So that means you can't subdivide it and make it an ownership condo, but you can charge a market rate rent for those rental units. And so the reason why we're proposing this is, I'll have you turn to page 3 in your little packet. It gives you a rundown of the costs, different permitting and impact fee costs. You see right there at the top, the biggest cost on that table, over $32,000 per unit, is for obtaining a residential development right. It can be very expensive. The development right itself is expensive. The process for obtaining it is expensive. And so we want to try to reduce that cost as much as possible for the types of housing that we see as most likely to become workforce housing. And the reason we're focusing on non-deed restricted housing here is because we've focused on deed restricted housing for the past few decades. We haven't seen the utilization of bonus units that we want to see. We haven't seen the production of workforce housing that we need. And so we want to, learn a lesson from that and see if applying this to non-deed restricted housing, certain types that are more likely to become workforce housing, will move the needle. So, questions, thoughts?
In our previous session, one of the things I had recommended be analyzed is kind of a minor change to our achievable housing definition that would require just to ensure to the greatest extent possible that these units are being actually used for workforce housing, because right now there's nothing that mandates that. So I would be in favor of using bonus units as long as we merge the first two categories. So you have to qualify, you have to have a household income of not in excess of 120% of the respective county's area median income. And at least one household occupant has to work at least 30 hours per week in the basin. Because I don't want to deplete our supply of bonus units on achievable housing if it's not meeting our intent, which is to have those units used for workforce housing. And right now, there's nothing that mandates that.
So I just want to clarify that what we're proposing here is not to require an achievable deed restriction, but not to require a deed restriction at all.
It doesn't have a deed restriction.
Achievable does have it's a deed restriction for achievable housing. So you have to meet the requirements
of 120%, but it's not deed restricted per se. I mean, they're not recording a deed restriction against the property.
Yes, in the case of achievable housing, they are recording a deed restriction against the property, and there's a reporting requirement that the people occupying the housing have to show that they're full-time workers in the basin, meet those work requirements.
Under the definition of achievable under the glossary of terms, I must be missing something. It's single or multifamily residential development to be used exclusively as a residential dwelling for permanent residents who meet one or more of the following criteria. A household income not in excess of 120% of the respective county's area median income, or at least one household occupant works at least 30 hours per week or full-time equivalency for an employer with a business license in the basin, or a resident is a retired person who has lived in a deed restricted unit in the Tahoe Basin for more than 7 years. So am I missing something? It doesn't sound to me like this is deed restricted.
Those are the requirements for the deed to comply with the deed restriction.
How come it's not stated that it's deed restricted? The other two, under affordable and moderate, specifically say residential housing that's deed restricted.
So we can fix that for
Because
the
I know
next
that's
packet.
been a
if it's
common,
not.
Jacob, a common complaint by people is that there's no limit, on achievable housing. There's no way of guaranteeing that certain income limitations are adhered to. And so.
Yeah, that's correct. So the achievable housing definition doesn't require the 120% of income is 120% of AMI is one way that you can comply, but it's not the only way. There's also a worker definition. But I would just want to bring us back to this policy proposal, which is proposing that we allow some types of housing units to use bonus units without a deed restriction, which is currently not something that we've done, but we want to study it in the EIS, give it a shot, because we think it would produce more of the housing we want to see.
So I guess, and that brings me back to my original statement, I'd be in favor of that as long as we marry the income restriction to, a working at least 30 hours per week in the basin.
Yes.
That requirement would go away under this proposal.
That we would still have an achievable pool of bonus units, but we would also have a pool of bonus units that could be used for non-deed restricted housing that wouldn't have any income or worker limits on them, but they would just have to be a certain type of housing that we know is more likely to be built for the local workforce.
Yeah, I wouldn't support that personally. I think that provides too many loopholes.
I think it's worth considering, with the exception of some kind of deed restriction around short-term rentals. Because that's what we see is, those smaller units are more affordable by design, yes, but they're more attractive than also to people that, have two homes that you want to buy a home within that range as well. So I think there's this weird overlap between homes that are affordable for our workforce and homes that are desirable for people to buy and then short-term rent as well. So I think as long as they're restricted, I would be willing to consider the analysis of it.
And yeah, I agree with that. And that's what we've seen in the city is actually for what we give for free for ADUs and multifamily, people have been willing to deed restrict to say that those will not be vacation rentals. And I think that even further than that, maybe we can come up with a deed restriction to vacation rental is going to give you this much coverage if you're willing to do 2 vacation rentals and condos. But I think we have to say vacation rentals are a must. And then if you want to add more to your deed restriction, you get more. I also take major concern with us opening bonus units just straight up to market rate. I think that, the people that live in loopholes are going to love that and see that, okay, now I can get a market rate allotment just because we've opened that up. And I think that's really something that we have to, but I want to see these bonus units be used for what they're intended for. I see the intention, but I also can definitely see the loopholes with people that want to save money in their new 5 bedroom great house that they're going to build.
Well, yeah, I just want to be clear that what we're proposing is we're in the packet. What we've proposed is allowing this for smaller duplexes through fourplexes for multifamily rental only housing. So it would have to be rented on the market, but the rents would be determined by what people can pay on the market for that, and for ADUs. So that's what we're proposing. And we could, include a short-term rental deed restriction. I think that that's something we could include in the proposal for analysis as well. So yeah, just to be clear on what's being proposed.
But it wouldn't, so how would we make sure though that that's like, it's not going to happen through a deed restriction, those requirements? They've just signed on to agree that they're going to keep it as rental property to a local, or how do we enforce that, or how do we, yeah.
So we can do that through a deed restriction, we believe, and that's what we have in the proposal. We could have currently we have these 100-year deed restrictions. We could do less in this case. Maybe we could do a 20-year deed restriction against converting these into condos. That's something that we've included in the proposal, just to ensure that we're not giving away units to build condos.
I still think it's a real temptation for somebody who is currently living outside of the basin to come in and rent a unit, for a more affordable price in the basin. Who wouldn't want to do that? And I understand that there may not be any way short of a deed restriction to prevent that from happening, but it is a concern, at least for me. Second homes are just deciding, I'm tired of living in Carson City. I want to go up and enjoy the lake. So I'll just rent, a townhome and that's where I'll live because it's, beautiful views. I mean, human nature being what it is. I mean, I can just foresee a lot of people abusing this. So.
It looks like Belinda's got her hand up.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to, add on to that comment about, the strong temptation that there will be because people can afford to do it is to, rent a smaller home in the Tahoe Basin because, it's they won't live there full time, but they'll try to take advantage of that situation. Yeah, I would just have a big concern with that as well. And I think that, if I'm understanding this process correctly, it being analyzed and actually, doing some research on, how that happens, maybe in other areas like Aspen or, there's similar vacation spots, which I think would just validate, our thinking that, if it just creates too much of an opportunity that, would have a negative impact instead of a positive impact on our housing stock, then that's a good reason to toss it out.
Yeah, thank you. And just a little reminder of some of the data, and I don't remember if all of this is published in this packet particular. Oh yeah, if you go to page 2, this little house figure here shows you the average per unit subsidy required for a deed restricted unit. So that's $200,000 to $540,000 per unit to build a deed restricted house. And that's money that, TRPA doesn't have to subsidize. We don't subsidize housing. I know the local governments don't have that money available to subsidize at the scale that we need. And that's really why we're looking at non-deed restricted housing, because we have this big need and we don't have the resources to do it all with deed restrictions. And so right now, currently 98% of our housing stock is not deed restricted. And so is subject to all of the, loopholes and possibilities that we've discussed. But so it's a trade-off of, we need housing available for our workforce, and how do we get there?
Well, what we need is a housing authority, and I know it was alluded to in the package, but I think it's time that we really examine that seriously and see who's willing to, assist in developing some sort of housing authority who can oversee this process.
I will just say that I really support that. I think one sentiment that comes from our council a lot is that the city is doing so much for affordable housing, but our neighboring jurisdictions are not doing much. And that's pushing so many people into what we're trying to develop. And it's not that we should be developing more. We have more long-term local residents. There's no doubt that we need to be doing more than some of our neighboring jurisdictions. But when some of our neighboring jurisdictions are almost doing nothing, that becomes a difficult thing. And I think the housing authority could help manage that, the counties or the cities get allotments because you performed on this affordable housing, and the housing authority could manage that.
And there are some housing authorities in some of the counties.
Yes, yeah. Currently, Washoe County, Placer County, El Dorado County have one. Carson City and Douglas County are under the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. So there are several housing authorities that are all kind of stretched out across their jurisdictions, most of which are not in the Tahoe Basin, and that's part of the reason we don't hear from them very often.
Kind of a joint powers arrangement. So there's consistency in terms of enforcement.
So yeah, I mean, these are all great ideas, and I know we've alluded to those to these before. You know, housing authorities are great. They don't print money. Also, like, you know, so they still have to get money from, you know, the federal government, which does print money but isn't giving it away. So
well, that's true, but I mean, it also helps to alleviate your workload. I mean, enforcement is always the biggest unknown in adopting new rules and regulations. So,
you know, as there is housing authorities, they're mainly focused on the West Slope here in California, and that's why under TRPA, and maybe it's not under TRPA because I know you don't need more, but the housing authority that brings us all together, the 5 counties, the city, the 2 states, it seems like more than trying to reach out to the West Slope, Placerville, or Roseville to get that done.
okay, so to summarize, it sounds like we have some skepticism about this idea, leaning towards opposition, leaning towards support on this side of the room. So does that reflect what I'm hearing? Okay.
Complete opposition.
Okay.
It's just conditional opposition.
Conditional.
Yeah, and I would
Conditional
say
approval.
I'm sort of skeptically optimistic. I'd like to see, you know, the numbers around it. I think I'd like to see the analysis.
Be with Stephanie, but I'm also very weary of the loopholes that could be created.
All right, well, let's move on to the next one, which is just as juicy as this one. Scaled development rights. So, oh dang, yeah, we had a lot of discussion here. Okay, well, we'll get through this. So we're proposing scaling development rights based on the size and impact of the unit. So currently, right now, a 3,000 square foot home is worth 1 development right. 3 1,000 square foot homes are worth 3 development rights. So this proposal would analyze whether a smaller unit should cost fewer development rights and a larger unit should cost more development rights based on their relative impact on the environment. So before we get into it, I want to mention that there's a possibility we could look at this in the EIS and come out with a finding that could increase the total number of units allowed in the basin. So for example, we could find that there's the same environmental impact for more smaller units as there would be with what we have now. And so that's something that we could find in the EIS, and I'm interested in, you know, it doesn't mean that we need to, you know, support that right now, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
Well, isn't that going to cause the growth cap to be exceeded?
That is, yeah, it's a question of what the growth cap is, whether the growth cap is a number of units as we define units, or whether the growth cap is the environmental impact of that growth. And so that's kind of a discussion that we would be having around this this idea.
And the only other option then would be to, I mean, if you're using your scenario, if we're creating 2 additional development rights, you know, on that parcel that has 3 smaller homes, that the compensating mechanism would be to retire other types of development rights that when combined are equivalent to a residential unit of use.
So that's something we could look at. I think there's a number of ways to project into the future of what could happen here. There's the victim of our own success possibility, where we've done such a great job with all of our incentives for smaller housing that now everyone just wants to build smaller units in town centers and we have more units. That's a possibility. There could be the possibility that, it's not utilized as much as we'd hope, and we'd actually see fewer units overall because people just keep building big houses and just buy the extra development rights to do so. So there's a number of possibilities there. We just don't know until we study it.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a pretty large analysis to do. I mean, I think I understand maybe what we're trying to do from a housing front, right? We're trying to disincentivize the large homes, but the large homes that sit vacant 80% of the year have less impact. So I think you're kind of talking about an apple and an orange in the same conversation there. So what is the goal? I would say, what is the overall goal? Is it to allow less sort of constraint around smaller units and housing? Or are we just trying to disincentivize larger units? Because I think the larger units, to your point, could prove out to be actually more environmentally beneficial if they're not occupied on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think we find that out in the EIS. The goal is a system, a development rights system that more fully reflects the environmental impact of the unit. Right now it's sort of a proxy measure for how many people are in the basin. So, if we could, tie that more to environmental impact, and maybe you're right, maybe we'll find that, that a large home has more. Sorry, Belinda, I'm talking too much.
No, that's yeah, well, I guess maybe I'm confused then because our goal in this context was addressing the affordable and achievable housing need. And so I'm looking at it through that lens. I think, the idea of, yes, these larger homes have less of a water quality impact on the lake because we don't have as many people driving around all the time. That I think is a true assessment. On the other hand, if we're really looking at, some of our more, really affordable housing needs, many of those people probably don't drive cars and they use public transit, to get to their service industry work. So, I just want to reframe the issue, I guess, from the perspective that I was looking at, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that really we should be looking at these issues through the lens of achieving our affordable housing goals.
If we're taking a 1 acre parcel and we're splitting it in three, right? The growth cap coverage is still 30% on the 1 acre parcel. Now it's 3 acre parcels, right? You still have the same amount of coverage spread across the 3 that you would on the 1. Is that not?
Well, we're not proposing subdivision of lots in this piece. So.
All right, you guys. So we'll all get settled back, and I think I'm going to ask Jacob and Julie how you guys want to do readouts, or what can I do to help from here? Or John, yeah.
Yes, we are going to have each of the three facilitators talk about the input they received topic by topic. So we won't go through them 3 times. We'll just go through. The first topic will be Jacob, and then he'll turn it over to one of the other two. So Jacob, are you ready? Jacob, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over what I talked about in my group. So we talked about reducing costs and barriers for smaller housing types. We didn't get to every topic or every policy change in each group, but we got to the really important ones in every group. So I thought that was good. The first one that we talked about was expanding the types of housing that can use bonus units. I think generally we had support for looking at this from across the group. Some groups are more skeptical or reserved than others, but generally I heard support for analyzing this. There was concern about ensuring that any housing type that receives a bonus unit can't be used as a short-term rental, can't be converted into a condominium. There was generally, I would say, some concern about just making sure that we are able to study and monitor how these units are being used, whether they're being occupied, what they're being rented for, what's the price point. So there was a suggestion to add a monitoring piece, an annual monitoring piece to this, where the owners of these housing types just report back on some questionnaires about this, so we can keep track of whether or not this policy is working. Okay, so the next piece is this idea of scaling development rights based on the size or environmental impact of the unit. And so here, again, I think we generally had support from the groups to analyze this, at least look into it. There was some concern about, okay, well, what happens when we come to when we find out what comes out of the environmental analysis, and we find that, oh, this could increase the number of small units. What does that mean for the growth cap? And so that's, something that was a concern, but not something that we felt, I would say that the groups felt like we need to address right now, just something that we need to be really clear and open about. There will be a decision about this in the future. We also talked about scaling fees for larger and smaller units. I heard support across the board for this one. So excited to study this more in the EIS. And then the last one I got to talk about with my group, because we had such great discussion about everything else, was this idea of allowing a junior ADU to be included in a home with the primary residence. So for those of you who didn't get to talk about this, a junior ADU is typically a rental unit or a unit with a kitchen or a kitchenette that's inside the footprint of the primary residence. And currently that is considered to be a residential unit of use. This is exploring the possibility of, could this be considered accessory to the primary residence and allowed without a new development right? And the group that I spoke to about this was interested in studying this in the EIS. That's all I have.
Okay, so our group was the water quality group, and we were talking through whether to allow workforce housing types from ADUs to multifamily rentals to have more flexibility with how they do coverage. So focusing on making sure that projects are focused on ensuring that they are meeting the water quality standard rather than focus on a strict coverage limit. And so for the most part, there was support for studying that. One group felt that those incentives should be limited to deed-restricted moderate income housing that was also restricted to workforce. So that was one piece of feedback that we got. Sorry, could you actually move this back so that I could see it a little bit more? And yeah, so let's see. From the point of view of in the menu, one of the options is local projects could tie into area-wide stormwater. So there was definitely concern about making sure that the system is generating enough funding to actually maintain those, to help local jurisdictions maintain them. There were also suggestions that we should look at multi-benefit projects. So when a transportation project is going in, really look at can we leverage that transportation project to also get a grant or funding to do stormwater treatment at the same time, thus allowing more housing to be built. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. In the back of the other one. I'm just going to move through this quickly. And then if anybody notices something that, you thought was really important, just please bring it up. So we looked at basically, I'm going to combine the discussion of this one, reevaluating excess coverage mitigation fees with scaling fees in general. We had some suggestions that there are some additional environmental impacts that we could potentially look at for different sizes and locations of housing. So there was support for really trying to reduce fees if possible for workforce housing projects, and potentially looking at charging higher fees for some of the big projects that are really close to the lake. There was a couple of people suggested that proximity to the lake might be having an environmental impact that we could do more research on and potentially work that into our fees. There was not a lot of support for just outright waiving fees for even for deed restricted housing. It was like, just, apply the fee and then use that fee to pay for monitoring, mitigation, and, scale it as much as possible, but don't waive it. Next, please. And then we also talked about using the newer maps, the NRCS maps, for determining land capability. And there was generally support for that. One group also suggested don't just limit it to the NRCS maps, but instead make it like a system that can be updated whenever we have better science, more updated information. Let's make sure that we have a system for being able to transition to that. So I'm going to take 10 seconds to just skim the starred notes that I have here. If anybody wants to jump in with anything that they've wanted to get out there, please jump in. The other thing was there was definitely support for in town centers and areas that are overcovered, support for allowing these incentives for market rate projects, but make sure that they're getting some additional, like removing coverage or getting an additional environmental benefit. So with that, I will turn it over to
Madam Chair, while they're switching, this is Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I just wanted to let staff know we have a committee meeting after that, and we're bumping up into a quorum. So we're just going to try to wrap it up as quick as we can. Thanks. It's fascinating. Fascinating.
I will be very quick. My group was increasing housing choice. So the first option was around removing barriers to ADUs, specifically removing coverage limits and some transfer fees and excess coverage mitigation fees for ADUs under 750 square feet. Generally, heard a lot of support from governing board members. They want to make sure that there is a deed restriction against short-term rentals. There was also some concerns about just the ability of local jurisdictions to enforce short-term rentals over time as more come online. There was also some questions about considering whether that 750 square feet should actually be 1,000 square feet or something in between. Let's see, the next policy was allowing small scale multifamily and traditionally single family neighborhoods. A lot of support for this policy option as well. And it sounds like a lot of local jurisdictions, this is their focus as well. There were some comments about needing sidebars and that there needs to be design standards. So making sure that if a fourplex is built in one of these neighborhoods, that it fits in with kind of the existing look and feel. And then making sure that we can do this legally with like HOAs was something that was requested to be studied in the EIS. Next one. So unlocking existing vacant housing. This is primarily a focus of the local jurisdictions, and we want to be very supportive, but we're kind of limited in the policies that we can actually implement to do this. Vince did have a suggestion that we look at our policies relating to someone wants to convert like an old commercial building or tourist building to residential, like making sure that we make it as easy as possible to do that. Next. Expanding town center boundaries. I think the main comment that we heard is only do this if the local jurisdictions are requesting it. And so we'll make sure that there's good justification for that one. Next. Offering local governments more control over height and density. This would be essentially removing the maximum that we have for town centers in our code and allowing local jurisdictions to set their own maximum through their area plans. There was kind of mixed support for this, some suggestions of doing it as like a pilot program in the jurisdictions that have requested it. There needs to be sidebars and definitely some restrictions in place so we don't get really tall buildings, and that this should be limited to only certain types of development. I think establishing, I think this is establishing a funding source for deed restricted housing. There was support for this and just kind of looking at the various ways that we could do this.
Thank you. And I know that we are up against a quorum issue right now, so I do want to check with Julie and Graham to see if we have motions we need to make or not. And then Jacob, if you wanted to wrap up. But I did just want to take a minute while we had everyone here. And then I do want to have discussion, but I want to make sure if we're making motions, we have people in the room to do that if we need to do that. I'm so proud of the staff on this. You guys, you do a lot of things well. This was so exceptionally done well. The thoughtfulness that went into how you frame these issues, the openness, the feedback you're taking from us, from the public, from each other, it makes me really proud. So thank you for the hard work. It shows. Keep it up. I know it's a lot of work, but I wanted you to hear that. I know the board feels the same way from me. Thank you. Okay, are we making motions today?
We don't need any motions.
Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to open
Jacob,
it up.
anything else that you wanted to say?
Yeah, please.
No, just thank you everyone for a really robust and interesting discussion. Excited for more.
Thank you. And with that, we can have a discussion here. Any board members that want to have discussion, have comments, because the only thing after this are reports. So this is sort of our time if we want to provide feedback here. Ashley?
Ashley Conrad-Seda for the record. I just wanted to echo the comments. Thank you. And also I really appreciate in the handouts that we get the emphasis on what we're building towards, really our vision for the future. And I think it's really important because we can get lost in these details and everything feels like these, sliced policy issues. But we're really trying to get towards more affordable, plentiful housing, ensuring lake quality, right? And delivering on a Tahoe that gives us everything that we talk about monthly. So I just really appreciate you keeping the eye on the big picture in everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Cody?
Yeah, I would also just echo exactly what you said. I think this has been a great process. It's really awesome to see the locals and residents getting involved, and how many people yesterday at our city council meeting. I've been at the part of the living working group, and it's really great to have that buy-in. One thing that we talked about right at the end of our stormwater was to analyze if our local utility districts actually took on stormwater management. And I think that's something that we really should look at. And I don't know if the EIS is the right, if that should be part of it, but I think that there's a real nexus between delivering fresh water to managing stormwater and the environmental impact. If we allow like STPUD to start dealing with that, they can have a lot of environmental improvements in their own processes of how they're pumping water up and over the hill. So anyways, I just think that the EIS may be a great way, and it also could give us the assessments we need to develop more of these projects.
Anyone else? Board questions or comments? All right. Shelley?
This is not major, but in the discussion about the prudence of eliminating fees for affordable housing, you know, an alternative would be some sort of fairly liberal amortization schedule where you'd amortize the fee over time to give them an opportunity to repay it, because we can't be too generous. There is a limit, obviously, to funding. So.
And I guess just to ask staff the quick wrap up then from this awesomely detailed work, the board will see this again in January. Can you guys just give us that one more time, what's coming in January, and so the public knows as well?
Yes. So what you can expect to see, we're going to go to APC in December and do the same workshop with them. So we'll be collecting feedback from them. We're going to record the notes that we have from you, see if there's any adjustments that we need to make to the proposal from the packet that you saw today. And then we'll bring you back that amended proposal in January, along with a notice of preparation and a request to initiate the environmental impact statement.
Thank you. Shelley?
Maybe this is a question for Jacob or John Hester, I don't know. So there are a lot of topics here that need to be analyzed. And the question is, can we analyze everything that we have identified as a potential issue within the EIS, given the amount of money that we have to allocate to the development of an EIS? Or are they going to selectively remove certain topics because analyzing them would exceed our budget?
Don't know that we know the answer to that yet, because we're still gathering the input, but if it does get to the point where we need priorities, that will be part of what we get from you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, to build on that, we've discussed some issues for analysis today. There's going to be a public scoping period following the notice of preparation, and so more opportunity to discuss issues that we think need to be analyzed in the EIS.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And thanks again. I will move us on then to our next agenda item, which is reports. I'll pass it over to Julie, Director Reagan.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. Great job, team. Really excellent work. We've worked really hard on this to make this efficient for you. I'm just going to be pretty fast. What I will do is send you the slide deck. It's also on the website under the meetings page, and I'll send you some notes after the fact, because I'm just going to kind of roll through this so we can get on with our regional planning committee. But I wanted to go through a couple here. If we could go to the next slide for me, please, that would be great. Wanted to take a minute to thank Member Hill for being the keynote at Nevada's American Planning Association chapter meeting right here in Northern Nevada at the Carson Valley Inn. And we got together to recognize one John Hester and a very well-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award, the President's Award for Planning. And wanted just to give Mr. Hester the chance to say anything, but it was very nice. A few of us were able to be there with John and have a table and celebrate an incredible career of planning that's still going on. But Mr. Hester, would you like to say a word on that?
I think if you work at something long enough, they have to give you an award.
Well, very modest, but 50 years in planning and has raised the bar here at TRPA over the last 14 years.
Started when I was 6 years old.
Exactly. just a precocious young man. Congratulations, John. We're happy to celebrate a wonderful and well-deserved honor with you. I will take the next slide. A couple other announcements. At a regional planning committee meeting a few months back, the chair of that committee, Vice Chair Henigman and Chair of RPC asked some questions. And we said, you know what, we should go out in the field and see it. So I really want to thank the board chair, Chair Williamson and Vince, and several of us worked with our city partners to go on a tour in the area of town, you know, around kind of that Sierra Boulevard area. And so that was us hearing about some of the plans from the city and from our long range planning team. We really want to thank Michelle Brown for organizing that. Michelle, thank you. It's a lot of work to organize field tours, a lot of work with a lot of partner activity and coordination. And then we got to see the under construction, the new multi-generational recreation center. And so Mayor Bass, thanks for all your support. You've been with us on these previous field tours as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say I would have been on this field tour. I have to actually recuse on the Bijou area plan. So my city attorney said, you should probably not go on that one. So that's why I wasn't there.
You were with us in spirit. But I did want to say, I mean, if anyone wants to go on a tour, the city, I'm sure would be happy to organize it. It is an incredible facility, and it's a good example, you know, in our destination stewardship work, a key pillar of the destination stewardship plan is harnessing the power of tourism for good for the community. And this is one example. There's a lot of funding sources to build this $80 million facility, but a city the size less than 25,000 of city of South Lake Tahoe could never afford without these TOT taxes that are funding this. And so it is all locally funded and really impressive. And we learned what a natatorium is, and then all the construction that's going into this is completely incredible. So appreciate the city for helping us go on a tour of that. Next slide. And just a couple more things. A big shout out to our board chair, who gave a great welcome at the North American Invasive Species Management Association conference. Just a few highlights there. It was a really proud moment for us to host people from all over the world talking about the threats of invasive species. And Haley gave an amazing speech at the opening, as well as Lydell Wyatt, who is the Washoe Tribal Liaison for Lake Tahoe. And so we partner with Lydell. He was with us to welcome this incredible crowd. Team Tahoe presented on multi-agency session, inspiring all of the attendees through our lessons learned and our successes at being one of the most protective programs of its kind in the United States and the world. It is truly a world-class program. And so there's our Mackenzie Koch and Sarah Underhill. We also hosted a tour of the Myers Inspection Station for invasive species to talk about how we're doing the prevention. I talked a little bit about control of existing species, and then plans for rapid response. And then another slide I have is about Washington, D.C. We also, just a couple of weeks ago, had a small delegation of Team Tahoe that went back to Washington. Never let a government shutdown go to waste, because they wanted to talk about something other than that. So it was great. We had an opportunity and a captive audience to hear. They were asking our delegation. We met with the delegation of both states, what's going on in Tahoe related to the shutdown, but also what can we do to look forward once we got through that. And we're really honored to have the chair of the Washoe Tribe, Cyril Smokey, and Lydell Wyatt, again with Darcy Collins of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. So more to come on that. We're going to do a briefing in January at our Environmental Improvement Program Committee on some of the legislative affairs activities, and we'll give you more there. And then while I was back east, just a quick note of the Cape Cod World Tourism Day Summit, and that is the Center for Responsible Travel, a group that I've been working with for several years. They had a convening to talk about all the things that we are grappling with in terms of stewardship and engaging, harnessing the power of tourism for good in our local communities that are struggling with things like housing. And I met with the Cape Cod Commission, and I told the group there, the housing panel that they had, if you had a big blue lake and some mountains in the background, they could have been exactly talking about Lake Tahoe, experiencing the same things with people having hours and hours long commutes to come in to work at the Cape, and to whether it's construction or to work in the restaurants, and some of the pressures that they have from climate change and all manner of things affecting their ecosystem, which is very special. So I can share more about that also through email. and then just a couple more. And I had to miss the Halloween pet parade because I was gone back east. So my Kelpie who is here I'm still in the doghouse because it's his favorite thing to dress up. And we had a visit from Cruella, aka Kim Carringer, there with Jackson, her dog, and lots of fun at the office with people bringing in their kids for trick-or-treating around the office and dressing up their dogs. So everyone had a great time on Halloween. And then I think we just have the Lake Leper Environmental Scholarship. Please continue to support that. We have made actually a difference in our local students' lives over the course of the last 15 years with this program through your contributions, the contributions of our Advisory Planning Commission, as well as TRPA staff. We actually do a direct payroll deduction to make it easy for our staff to contribute. And then here are the most recent winners, Juniper Brand and Samantha Carnevale. And these are students that are in need financially, that are studying environmental professions. And actually one of our recipients in the past from 20 years ago, Dondra Biller, went on to earn her PhD and build a career advancing sustainable water solutions, and keeps in touch with us to let us know what she's up to and how she's doing and how that scholarship really affected the course of her whole career and her life. So it's a great program. For those of you who have contributed in the past, a big thanks. And Dondra's back. I didn't even know that. Oh my God, so great. Yay. Thanks for that, Brooke. Okay, what's coming up? I think you know what's coming next month. We covered that last month. A quick fine point of the holiday luncheon, because we're trying to build our business for the board in the morning and to wrap up by around 1 o'clock so that we could enjoy the holiday lunch together and then conclude the board meeting. That's the plan. As you know, agendas are never 100%. We can't lock them down, but that's our goal. And speaking of holidays, we did have a pretty cool update, and Kim Carringer is going to share something that is happening in terms of tree cutting for Christmas.
Thanks, Julie. Kim Carringer for the record. I just wanted to mention, since the holidays are upon us and we're all thinking about potentially getting a Christmas tree for either, us or our families. Many of you may not know that Bruce Barr, our forester, is adjunct faculty at the Lake Tahoe Community College. And there has been limited availability in the basin with the Forest Service not issuing permits on their land recently. So Bruce has been working with the college to think through the EIP possibilities of restoring adjacent meadow there to Trout Creek and offering it for Christmas tree cutting. So it's been we issued a permit last year for a limited amount of trees, around 50, and a slow phase of just having the faculty last year. This year, they may start rolling it out to the public, maybe get a public convening day with us and the league, Bruce on site. So it's a really exciting update. Just want to let you know.
Because currently it's something that the locals look forward to and line up at like 7 a.m, usually at the Basin Management Unit office on off Al Tahoe, but they're not doing them in the basin for the Forest Service. You can go the Tahoe Forest or the El Dorado, which a lot of local community members have done. So pretty exciting. And it's a meadow restoration initiative because conifers are encroaching. So wanted to share that with you. And then we heard from the housing team that they're bringing this back, the housing discussion back in January. We also have the big threshold updates for water quality and forest health. So January should be a pretty meaty meeting. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Reagan. Graham, General Counsel.
No legal update today. That's good.
That's easier. All right. Agenda item 10, governing board member reports. Any governing board member reports? And online, seeing none. Okay. Committee reports. Agenda item 11. Still none. All right. That brings us to our final agenda item, which is our closing public comment period. This is any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. We will limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker. And I don't see anyone in the room. So why don't we go to online, if I can please ask if we have hands raised for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one hand raised online. Abby Lichtman, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, guys. I had to step out for a few minutes, so I missed the last part of the conversation, and I apologize if this has been discussed already. One of the things that I think could be really a very quick way to create a lot of housing units for local workers is to allow tiny houses on wheels and RV parking, provided they're built to code and provided they're not for weekenders, they're for employees. And so, you know, from what I understand, there was some pushback from the RV parks many years ago about that, but I wanted to know if there's any plans to, you know, because I know in the rest of Nevada County and the rest of Placer County, they're allowed, again, provided they're built to code. So I wanted to know if there's anything in motion there, or what would be the right way to work on that to create more housing units. Because like I have a tiny sitting in elsewhere, and I would love to bring it up and create a unit, but it's not legal here.
Madam Chair, we'll be happy to follow up offline.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for your comment, and we will follow up with you offline. Are there any other hands raised?
One more hand is raised. Melissa Sotterson, please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, Melissa Sotterston, South Lake Tahoe, and great presentation. You guys have really made a lot of progress on this topic for housing. We've spent years discussing housing in Tahoe, and it seems we are still failing to grasp that we have a housing crisis compounded by a cost of living crisis, and that achievable does not mean affordable. To reduce this burden, we need to lower the costs in taxes, garbage, utilities, and insurance on homeowners and renters rather than solely incentivizing development. All of these costs are too high to justify many long-term rentals and could be solved through simple steps, such as prioritizing funding for defensible space and infrastructure rather than strategic partnerships geared towards environmental destruction like so many logging projects. Mixed-use zoning is also extremely important. It encourages walkability and decreases VMTs. Childcare should be encouraged at new developments, apartments over our grocery stores and strip malls. Coffee shops and barbers should be in neighborhoods, small businesses, and homes. All of this would significantly lower costs, encourage responsible economic growth, and revitalize existing communities. Tiny ADUs and RVs on family properties should be allowed to bypass requirements for sewer units and utility hookups because my children can come inside to pee. Flooding is as much of an issue as stormwater treatment. Allowing coverage offsets to be purchased does not address parcel level flooding, much like carbon offsets allowing free polluting of marginalized neighborhoods. Programs like Lease to Locals are wonderful. However, rather than rent payments to property owners, many would prefer help with home repairs, insurance, evictions, and paperwork processing. We also need to lower the burden on local jurisdictions on monitoring for these programs, as well as public property BMPs. Failing drainage and street runoff is a primary driver of water quality issues, and rather than continue these strategic partnerships, TRPA funding should be dedicated to these vital community-based projects. Finally, I would like to reiterate the importance of public comments being allowed after presentations and before discussion. This current process is not at all transparent or good faith engagement. And again, I cannot see your faces. It's really hard to know whether I'm being heard. It's really hard to know if I send comments in written form, whether they're going to be read. So it would be really nice to see your faces while we're making these public comments here. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment.
Thank you. All right. With that, we will close the public comment period. And I'm looking for a motion to adjourn at this point. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're adjourned at 3 o'clock, and the